my fellow Westorians. I'm Aziz, with me is Ashea, and this is Valar Rereadis special Christmas edition? Not really, it's 2 days after Christmas as of this recording, so it's like a holiday Valar Rereadis. We'll call it that, yeah. Holidays for everyone. A Dance with Dragons is the longest of the books so far. It's also the darkest and least understood, thanks to being the most recent. It's the culmination, also so far, of George's style, honed over the course of the prior books and the rest of his long career. It has the extended length of A Storm of Swords, the expanded pacing of A Feast for Crows. It brings together POVs like A Clash of Kings, and has the setup of a Game of Thrones. If you're watching live, you can feel free to ask live questions. You can also send questions and comments ahead of time by joining the discussion on one of our social media outlets. Facebook, Flick, Discord, and Slack are all available. Check out the Isle of Faces podcast. That's Joe Buckley's show. He calls the Valar Rereadis tandem episodes Scraps and Scrolls. Lots more thoughts on each chapter are available for you if you are so inclined. Also, if you would like to read more about these topics and others, check out Nina Friel on Tumblr. That's goodqueenally.tumblr.com with one L in Alley. Our POV by POV versions are up on Patreon. If you're a patron or were thinking about joining, that's, well, extra incentive. All through the first 4 books, we have episodes. The Valar Rereadis episodes are chopped up so that they are only solo POVs. So you could, say, listen to all the Arya in a row, all the Arya in Game of Thrones, then all the Arya in Clash of Kings, all the Arya in The Storm of Swords, etc. So we have that for all the POVs in the prior books, and eventually we'll have it for Dance with Dragons as well once we're done. We also have a reorganized main feed. By now, a lot of y'all have heard that. Check it out if you are doing some binging. It makes it a lot easier having everything in order. And if you have suggestions for different orderings, we're all ears. This is a new thing for us, so we're up for suggestions. Also, check out my new San Rixian shirt here. Check out the San Rixian store. You know, you may have already done your holiday shopping, but there's always more people you can get some gifts for, or why not shop for yourself? I got my Greyjoy version today because we've got an Asha chapter today, but we also picked up a few other San Rixian shirts, so we'll be showing those off on other days. Today we have the King's Prize, the one with the cold count, aka Big Bucket wants to bathe in Bolton blood.
Daenerys 7, a secret pact by the Red Door, aka the Harpy weds the dragon.
John 9, the Princess and the Queen, and the Fool, and the Banker, a.k.a. Alys in Wun-Wunderland.
And finally, we have the Blind Girl, Daycat, Lighter of the Nightwolf, a.k.a. Dressing the Dead in Darkness.
Yeah. Indeed, we do return to Braavos, but before we do, John will think of it in his chapter, and of Arya herself, of course, not knowing she's there, though, nor aware that she killed one of his men. He'll also actually meet and negotiate with a Braavosi banker who will in turn head out to Stannis, where Asha will meet him later in the book. And Dany learns of a secret pact made when she was but a babe, and the key witness was the Sea Lord of Braavos, so Braavos is all over the place. Well, actually, it's in one place. It just comes up. 2 weeks ago, Dany and Jon each had a chapter, and they were back to back. That's going to happen 3 more times. In fact, 7 of Dany's 10 chapters are right next to a Jon chapter. 8 if you count John Connington. I don't, but it's good for a chuckle. Given how much in common they have, Dany and Jon, and how much they're foreshadowed to face together and or do together, it's fitting, right? We notice a similar pattern with Jaime and Cersei. Of course, Jaime and Cersei have a lot more closeness for obvious reasons, yet that makes it more of a familiar pattern having seen it with them. It really stands out, too, with our running through of all this in Valar Rereadis. We've noticed just how much their stories, their themes line up. When one of them is dealing with refugees, so is the other, etc. There's so many things that have lined up. We've gone over a lot of examples. So it really focuses too this batch of chapters, this area in the book, not just these 4, but this general area of the book. A lot of the chapters are lengthy in terms of how much time they cover or how much time has passed before the last chapter that we had in Arya's case. For example, Arya's chapter only covers a single day, but months have passed since her last chapter. Asha's chapter covers well over a month. We had Bran a few weeks ago. That was well over a month. Tyrion drifted on the Gulf of Grief for weeks. But Jon's chapter is only a single day and a really busy day full of visitors and tough decisions. He falls asleep at his desk. That's how busy it is. Dany counts the minutes, agonizing how little time she has with Daario and how soon she'll be married. Her chapter covers about 2 days. There's a real different feel in the amount of time that's passing in these chapters, except for the, quotes, main characters, if we're going to go that route in describing them. Speaking of marriage, I'd say it qualifies as a theme today. Asha is pursued by Justin Massey for her claim, and she discusses marriage customs of the Mormonts with Alysanne, who also mentions that her sister was murdered during a wedding, the red one, of course. Dany actually marries his Dar, while rejecting Quentin's unluckily timed offer of same. Alys Karstark flees a forced marriage to Cregan Karstark, while Axel Florent pushes Jon for access to Val with marriage in mind. It doesn't come up in Arya's chapter directly, but Jon, while thinking of Arya, realizes that if she were at the Wall, he would have to send her away, or else Stannis would marry her to one of his men. Rhaegar and Lyanna are present in the background, occasionally in the foreground, often enough that we need like a device of some kind to measure it. A Rhaegar counter or a Lyannamometer. Today they'd both register pretty high, probably the latter more than the former, because Alys Karstark fleeing an arranged marriage on horseback, mistaken as Arya by Melisandre. I mean, Arya looks like Lyanna, so we've kind of, by the transitive property here, we've got Alys kind of looking like Lyanna as well, at least in the vision anyway. And of course, we've been told Arya looks like Lyanna many times. And today we'll see something of what we saw in that vision through the real Arya. Lyanna tells Benjen to be quiet because she's not supposed to be practicing with swords. We saw that in Bran's chapter. Likewise, Arya herself is doing what's been forbidden to her by the House of Black and White, getting around being blind via skin changing, continuing to repeat her list while being exceptionally stubborn and willful. And what part of her did she hide? Stubbornly refusing to concede that part of her identity that she's imbued so much of her starkness into? Her sword. She hid Needle. She wasn't allowed to practice with a sword. And just like Lyanna. Yeah, not just like, but similar. The House of Black and White forbade her to keep that sword. But, no. Like Lyanna, she's a wolf and not the tame kind. Asha herself has a bit of Lyanna in her character, though this isn't the Wayward Bride chapter. She is that. In the midst of her affair with Daario, Dany asks Barristan about her parents' side relationships, and that brings up some very interesting topics. Dany comes so very close to thinking about her brother and his extramarital affair that may have become a marital affair. Instead, she thinks how it would be nice if Daario carried her off like her brother Rhaegar carried off Lyanna at Sword Point, romantically, which is probably not how it happened. But even if it was, that's a rather, shall we say, fairy tale version of events, which is fitting because fairy tale influences are very much present today. Big Bucket, a giant of a man, jokes about wanting to live in a castle in the clouds, which is where the giant in Jack and the Beanstalk lived. Another name for that story is Jack the Giant Killer, a similar name to Godry the Giant Slayer. Alys, of course, is in Wun-Wunderland. At least she's not Alys in chains, though if she were forced to marry her cousin, she may as well have been. The Frog Prince appears directly in Dany's chapter. There's another fairy tale where she has a decidedly un-fairy tale-like wedding, wearing literal gilded chains while marrying his Dar. So she's Dany in chains, joined by Asha also in chains. All these side project bands are starting, I guess. Asha is not exactly the proverbial princess in a gilded cage, but again, she is a princess and she is in a cage, while everyone else struggles around her and she thinks how she's comfortable in said chains. It's a pretty similar symbolic similarity, surely. Usually a princess is the queen's daughter and or the king's daughter, but this time Asha is the king's prize. The one with the cold count, aka Big Bucket, wants to bathe in Bolton blood. Yeah. A difficult trek towards Winterfell to reckon with the Boltons, as Stannis puts it, or to die in the attempt, as Stannis puts it. It begins the setup for the Battle of Ice, as the chapter ends with them stuck in the same Crofters village with the same frozen lake where we all expect this to happen. So in her next chapter, Asha will see Stannis relent his position of no burnings, pray harder, and allow for cannibals in his midst to be burned to death. So really, the thing this chapter is more than anything else, perhaps, is set up for winter, or at least for the Battle of Ice, big part of winter. As the clansmen say, this isn't really winter, though. It's Autumn's Kiss, which is like, whoa, we haven't seen anything yet, apparently. I'm sure they're exaggerating a little bit for effect, but still, wow. We see how horribly it affects the men from the south already, and how well the men from the north are handling it. But relatively speaking, it's still hard for them. They just make it look easy compared to the southerners, who are just suffering horribly. Winter is coming. Shireen's burning is coming. All these elements are there. This one has some really excellent quotes. Stannis talking about his brother killing Roose and Ramsay by himself after battering the gates down. One, he'd kill Roose with his left, the Badger with his right, all that. Great line. There's banter between Asha and Alysanne. I love that. The bathing in Bolton blood comment, of course. We're not going to quote them all. They're all so good, and I suppose you just read them. But it's worth shouting them out. And Big Bucket isn't much for metaphor, I guess. He's more direct and blunt with his words. Stannis, too, really. Alysanne Mormont, too. It's a chapter full of blunt truths. But the man writing these characters, that's a different story. In this book, in particular, he's done a lot of using dawn and dusk and day and night and moons and stars and suns to start off chapters, and here's another beautiful example.
The king's host departed Deepwood Motte by the light of a golden dawn, uncoiling from behind the log palisades like a long steel serpent emerging from its nest.
That is not blunt, right? That is metaphorical, it's descriptive, it's cool, and it's an important symbol, too. A long steel serpent awakening with the sun, a dragon of the dawn, the golden dawn, perhaps. Not a stone one, a steel one. It's not a stone dragon. That's important, especially Stannis, right? But it's emerging from log palisades, not stone walls, too. So it's just really no stone at all here. And it's more like emerging from the earth, like a fireworm more than a dragon. If we take that a little bit further, this is already stretching the example, but still, dragons don't like the cold. Fireworms even less. Said so-called steel serpent slowly starts struggling southward. Severe snowstorms suddenly swirling savagely. Soon, Stannis stubbornly stops, staying still, seething silently.
Now
Sorry.
Say that 2 more times. Fast.
Real fast. That was 22 S words in a row. I sat there for a while trying to add more and more S's to that. So there, as Joe Buckley writes, this quote kind of establishes the grandness of it all first. The many bright colors, banners, and surcoats. Who would be proud of that? Dantos hollered, right? The banners, the banners. This all represents life, victory, and, success elsewhere. Establishing all these large numbers, showing how great it all is, just so you can see it struggle and collapse and fall apart, right? All this great steel serpent, it doesn't work out so well. They expect a 15-day march, but by the time the chapter ends, it's been well over 30. This is the place they stay at, right? It'll be 20 chapters before we come back to Asha and Stannis. They're first today in our batch of 4 chapters, and as it turns out, in part 17, when we come back to them, they're going to be first again. It just kind of worked out that way. We didn't plan it like that. So this chapter fits in well with a lot of the other recent chapters in that it covers a lot of time. As it is with pretty much any woman with a claim and no children, and even if they do have children, a lot of times they're pursued for marriage because of that claim. But being childless makes you a really big target for that, right? Sansa, Brienne, Jane being made into Arya, etc., real Arya, etc. It's just, when it's about claims, it's about power. Youth isn't even necessarily required, right? They want the power. It doesn't necessarily matter if the woman can still have kids, like Lady Hornwood, for example. But Asha is only 24 or 25 here, so they're really sniffing after her. And, of course, the only one we really see here is Justin Massey. So you see, for example, with examples like this, if I was Lady Dustin, I wouldn't remarry either. We talked about that before, and this gives us more reason to understand that. Now, Asha's situation is trickier. She doesn't actually have land, but she has a potentially far more land than, say, Lady Dustin. And this is a particular thing with Stannis' army because so many of the lords and knights in his group left ancestral holdings behind and may never get them back. So they want to replace that. And remember, It's a good time to point out that getting a lordship is akin to minor deity, like being ascending to godhood in a minor sense. People will do anything to get it, meaning we've seen violence and all sorts of trickery, and this is what we're looking at here. Because, Justin Massey's not going to attack Asha to get her claim. That's not going to work. So he's being nice. He's a decent person, pretending to be maybe brave, wise, patient, whatever he's got to do to win her over. He's just going to pretend. Now, we don't know if he's pretending or not, though. Maybe he's already like this. But that's the point here. We don't know because he's showing his best face to Asha to try to make his case to be her husband. And of course, more important is Stannis, because Stannis is going to make that call. So he's also that way to him. Now, to be fair, Stannis does kind of describe him that way, saying that he's charismatic, has a glib tongue. So I suppose this is just the kind of man he is. But it's important to recognize that the situation, the circumstances, don't necessarily call for judging him on the surface like that. And I also roll my eyes at him. This guy is like trying to win Asha over. At one point, she's walking after her cart is broken down. She's walking in chains with her broken ankle. And he's like, well, I can't share my horse, so you have to walk. It's like, what? If you're a dude trying to woo a woman, are you really going to let her walk on her broken ankle while you're riding your horse? Like, give her the horse. Like, I think we know what Sandor or Brienne would say about knighthood. In this particular example, it'd be like, yeah, typical. Like, see, these are knights for you. Asha thinks of Theon as a comparison to Stannis, in that they're both younger brothers with the attitudes of younger brothers. Robert's name comes up several times. One of them is worth quoting for several reasons, humor primary among them.
Your Grace's royal brother was renowned for turning fallen foes into friends. Make me your man.
The gods did not make you a man. How can I? Now, of course, Stannis is very misogynist, and it really comes out in this chapter. That's really more about the wordplay, because it's not actually funny, but the joke is good. But the meaning is not. Robert's relationship with women wasn't healthy either, but Stannis is, it's a different kind of unhealthy. Asha is smart and shrewd, and, well, this wasn't a great play on her part. She realizes afterwards, like, man, I really should have caught that. I should have known. I've got my own brother, Theon, who grew up in the shadow of his older brothers. He should have figured that out. Joe writes it really well. She displays a bit of a mistake here by bringing up the two subjects almost guaranteed to ensure Stannis doesn't listen. Robert and gender. And, well, there's 3 times it happens in this chapter, right? Robert and Stannis get compared. He doesn't want to hear about that, right? And it's just not, he's under a lot of pressure. He generally doesn't want to hear that, but really not right now when things are falling apart all around him. And it's not a great sign for his ability to rule later, given how let's read the quote, how Stannis seems to view women. It's really interesting getting how he looks to other people through the eyes of a woman.
Even with Galbart Glover's wife, the pious Lady Sybil, he had been correct and courteous, but plainly uncomfortable. This southern king seemed to be one of those men to whom women are another race, as strange and unfathomable as giants and grumpkins and the children of the forest. The she-bear made him grind his teeth as well.
Right, like he's not cruel to women. He's just, this is a good way to put it, they're like alien to him, right? It's almost like maybe he's asexual or highly repressed into men. Lots of possibilities. We'll probably never know. But this may be additional evidence for the notion that Melisandre used lust powder on him, given that he just, like, what did she do to get him interested or get him in the mood, so-called, I mean, even with all these different examples. It would be one thing if it was just one woman, right? But we now have a bunch of examples. We did see him talking to Catelyn, right? That was the actual first example of Stannis being seen by a woman, but it was a really brief amount of time. Asha sits with him every night, right? And she's a better judge of character than Davos or Jon, I think. She's more insightful, she's more nuanced in her takes, and she's also seeing Stannis in a situation that neither of them have really seen him in. Maybe Davos kind of has, but still, the desperation of losing at Dragonstone or losing at Blackwater isn't quite the same as this desperation of campaign and being in the elements. So here's a good example of Asha's read on Stannis. I think it's very insightful.
The king stood outside his tent, staring into the night fire. What does he see there? Victory? Doom? The face of his red and hungry god? His eyes were sunk in deep pits, his close-cropped beard no more than a shadow across his hollow cheeks and bony jawbone. Yet there was power in his stare, an iron ferocity that told Asha this man would never, ever turn back from his course.
In another passage, she notes how angry he is, describing it as cold fury. Given how much she ponders the nature of older brothers and living up to them with his sarcastic comments about Robert, I think we're meant to consider, not for the first time, that Stannis takes all of this far, far more personally than he'd ever admit. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just a minor irritation to him. It's hard. That is the trick about Stannis, is he's hard to read in that sense, because he's not exactly the most open guy about what's going on in his mind. He tells you what he wants to do, but not what he's feeling. On one, he's very blunt and direct, and the other is a huge mystery. So, given what we learned from Asha about how Stannis sees women, it's notable that this is the chapter in which George writes Morgan Little coming to apologize to Asha for calling her the C word in his battle lust. It's another example. This guy's not a knight, but it's a somewhat knightly thing to do. Maybe we shouldn't be calling that knightly, since so few knights actually do this sort of thing. But I wonder if it's meant to contrast Sir Justin, who, of course, is a knight, and again, didn't give her his horse, and is generally just being ambitious while pretending to be friendly. So she also notes how the common men react to Stannis, which is very positively. They have a lot of confidence in him, a lot of faith in him. And a lot of the lords complain about the march and the weather, and so do the commoners, but they still trust Stannis. They still think it's going to work out. The suffering, they think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Now, Asha believes taking her down will be of no use to the north because she's a woman. She's not quite accurate on this one. She's a little off on that. She thinks, yeah, Stannis is making a mistake showing me off as the prize because they're just not going to think much of that. But it's not entirely true. They, as we see elsewhere, they do talk about it. They do mention that he's beaten the Kraken now a couple of times. It kind of qualifies him to clean the north of Ironborn. And it just speaks to his general power and his what's the right word? Just the way people think about Stannis, the mystique of Stannis. Maybe it's not as big a deal as she thinks it is, but it does matter. And she is correct, though, about her worth as a hostage for her people. Stannis thinks that maybe there's some value there, although we don't see him say that. It's not necessarily clear. Some of it's just her estimation, I guess. But she's right that there's no ransoming her for any real value. Maybe Euron would pay a little bit to get rid of her, but even that is chintzy. I don't think he's too worried about her. So the chapter really ends with the focus on snow, how it makes everything the same, how it freezes not just them, but almost time itself. It gives the same timelessness that we've been having in a lot of different chapters, which is enhanced by the amount of time that actually passes. We talked about that in the intro today, about that fundamental tool here that's being used in so many of the POVs. The mood and the desperation, the painful crawl, it's so bad, right? This is just a complete disaster. Even though they have so much confidence in Stannis, there's really nothing else you can call it. They didn't know it would get this bad. They didn't know winter would be this bad. But now we know. Look how sudden and terrifying it is. And this is just one army. This is one campaign. Imagine this throughout the whole North. Imagine this when more time has passed. And the food situation's even worse. And it burns at Stannis too personally, because he cares about how he's seen. He cares about that mystique, as we were talking about. It matters, and he cares about his reputation. Imagine him thinking, well, that's how I ended, just frozen in the snow. My army just turned to ice like that. That's a very ignominious end for someone of his stature. But we also have to keep in mind, it's not just Stannis that the men are following and trusting. The Northerners are very much interested in saving, quote, Ned's girl, echoed Big Bucket. Well, that's who they really care about. As Joe puts, all 5 books have been littered with evidence of how special Eddard Stark was as a leader, how his legacy has lived on, how brilliant he was. And this is perhaps the best example that we've ever seen. He's been dead for a while. They don't know this kid. They don't know Arya personally. But because it's Ned's girl, that's enough for them to do everything, to march through this horrendous winter situation, this awful fighting through the snow, just putting themselves through such hardships for someone who's dead, for the daughter of someone who's dead. That says so much. Would anyone do that for Tywin's children? Nope. Nope, they would not. What's going to happen to Tywin's children? Well, one of them is going to get walked through the street naked. And, well, we'll see about the others, but they're not in great shape right now either. So that's a huge deal. We talk about the legacy of these characters. What did Ned earn by screwing up, I'm using finger quotes, the politics early on? Well, this is what he earned. By being that kind of man, he made the world better for his children. Will it be this way for Sansa? Big question. I think it will. Because I think, well, eventually they're going to find out that either that wasn't Arya or Arya's not there. And Sansa's probably going to get to the north before the real Arya does, I would guess. And maybe they'll rally for her, because that's Ned's girl. And she's a little older, perhaps capable of taking on a leadership role rather than just being a symbol. So this could be set up for that. That's cool. I'm looking forward to that. And that leads to Big Bucket Wall's wonderful speech about how he and his men will end. They don't want to die in winter. They don't want to die like we just described Stannis grinding his teeth about, just stuck in the snow. Much better to die fighting, even if you lose. And there's really no better cause to die for than saving the Ned's girl, right? And he also says men die in war, as it should be, which is kind of like, yeah, that's true. It's a standard truth, I suppose. But I wonder if that's a little foreshadowy too, because we have all this talk of people not dying, of them coming back, of the undead, as it should be. Men should die and stay dead, right? Nina writes he wishes to die with Bolton blood on his face and have men die fighting the Boltons rather than alone in the snow. Reminds us of Roderick Dustin's Winter Wolves during the dance. The grizzled graybeards and old male in ragged skins, every man a seasoned warrior, every man a horse, coming to die for the Dragon Queen. Very similar. They pledged to her, and they're going to follow their word there. And they didn't even necessarily love her like they loved Ned Stark's daughter, or at least Ned Stark. So, but we do think it's going to probably turn out for Stannis in the short term. This isn't TV show Stannis where this is basically the end for him. Really don't think so. And they're close to Winterfell, and we have reason to think that they're going to turn some things around, the ice trick and all that. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. But be that, as far as we're concerned, it looks like things are probably going to turn around as bad as it is. We see these really substantial cultural differences. That's another thing I think is important setup for something that's going to be a lot more widespread in a lot of other POVs, a lot of other chapters all over the continent. Northerners who don't really like the idea of R'hllor, Southerners who don't really like worshiping trees, all three, like a triangle of religions not liking each other. And it's super interesting that we get to see that from Asha, who is the member of a fourth religious group. So she sees these other three sort of talking it out and playing back and forth and seeing them kind of factionalize, because it is the religious lines are a big part of how they break down, or at least religious/cultural. You got the Queen's men who are R'hllorists, you got the King's men who are worshippers of the Seven, and you've got the Northerners who are, of course, worshippers of the old gods. It's okay. It's working out okay now, but we know that there's a potential for a lot of great friction later, or bigger friction than there is now, more than just arguments. Think about Asha as a comparison to Val. Obviously, Stannis technically considers her his prisoner as well, despite Jon setting her free to go do some negotiating. As we know, she does come back, so that's not really a problem. But just contrast how they're treated, right? You've got this so-called wildling princess who's allowed pretty much to. She has some freedom of the castle, not entirely. I mean, she did stab a guard, so there's that. But even after that, well, I guess has that happened yet? I may be getting ahead of myself. She may not stab the guard till later. Regardless, she has this additional freedom, unlike Asha, who is like, where am I going to go? How could I possibly run? Would I really run away in the snow with a broken ankle? Like, why do you need to go through all this all these security measures when I'm really not going to get away? So it's a pretty interesting difference in leadership style and trust as well. An interesting question too. Nina brings up in a almost forgotten character, maybe even George forgot him. Probably not. He's probably just dead. Lawrence Snow, who was supposedly a candidate to be heir to the Hornwood lands after presumably Ramsay is killed. And well, he was at Deepwood Mott. He was he may have been left there. But anyway, just an interesting open question for kind of a very very tertiary character, but still his name could pop up again, so we want to keep track of him. Now, very sad, almost this moment, this conversation, Alysanne and Asha. And the reason it's sad is because they start to have the beginnings of a bonding moment, right? They smile, there's a little laughter, they're like, I get how it is. They're bonding over being a woman in a campaign filled with men and being chased for marriage. There's certain things they get about each other that very few people around them are going to understand. So the groundwork is there for them to have a friendship, but it falls apart quickly when their cultures come up. And it ashames Asha a bit because, well, first of all, Asha wanted this. This is what Asha wanted. At the Kingsmoot, she's like, let's make friends with the Northmen. Let's make allies with them. Let's do this. Let's grow. Let's build. Which, yeah, ideally that is how it would go. But unfortunately, history is coming. Alysanne starts to see Asha as a person, but then remembers, then it comes back. It all comes rushing back. That for thousands of years, the Ironborn have raided, raped, pillaged the Bear Island and elsewhere. And it's not like the Brackens and Blackwoods, right? Where there's a back and forth where you can say, okay, this time the Blackwoods were the bad guys. Next time the Brackens were the bad guys. And if you look back, you just add it up. No one's a good guy. No one's a bad guy. It's just one big bloody mess. Not here. Alysanne Mormont's like, we are the way we are because you made us this way. And there's no back and forth. There's no Mormont invasion of the Iron Islands at any point. It's always been one-sided. It's always been...
I mean, who wants the Iron Islands?
Who wants Bear Island? No.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Probably not a whole lot better.
People who live there, they want to keep it. That's I guess we can go at least that far. So right, like they're fighting over scrap, so it must be pretty bad. So that's a pretty big deal, right? This history really stands between them. Like, even if they were to forget who they are, her people can't forget who she is. They can't forget. The Mormont people will never forget who Asha is. Building peace between these two peoples is not something that can happen in a single generation, I don't think. I think it would take many generations of building trust, and that trust is not there. It's certainly not going to happen just between these two women. But it is nice to see that there is a possibility, that spark is there. Next week, in fact, we'll get an example of Bracken and Blackwood when we have a Jaime chapter, and that is going to stand in contrast to this. So that's kind of nice that we get another under-the-radar theme George sticks in here of long-running feuds and just what that means, how to deal with that, how to get around it. So it's almost a warm moment. And maybe you can call it a warm moment. It just ends quickly. The cold air from outside blows and the warmth is gone. But it was there. It's also what Jon wanted. Jon has been pushing for this. Dany as well. bridging difficult, long, bloody cultural divides. The free folk befriending Northerners, is that really that different than Ironborn and Bear Islanders getting along? Not that different, really. Yeah, right? I mean, the Ironborn have been raiding Bear Island. Have the free folk been attacked by the Watch? Not really. Maybe a little bit, but mostly it's the free folk raiding south. So it's almost a one-sided thing in that sense too, but in a different way because of the huge difference in technology and other things.
But, I mean, it's similar, though, in that, too, obviously, in that both the free folk and the Ironborn have really a shitty lot.
Yeah, that's true. They have
so they're attacking because of that.
You're right. It's partly because it's not raiding because they're just greedy bastards. It's raiding because a lot of it is to survive. Yeah. You're right. It's true. I mean, some of it's raiding to be greedy bastards. Let's be clear. I really shouldn't use the word bastard like that. It shouldn't be an invective. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm a bastard.
Super chat from Morley. Happy holidays, History of Westeros, and to everyone in the chat. Thank you so much for all the fabulous content. Thank you, Morley. Thank you to everyone in the chat. Thank you for everyone who listens. Thank you for all the wonderful community we have. You all are a part of it. Whether you actively participate or not, you are a part of it. And we are so happy for that. So appreciative, so blessed. So here's to another year coming up, 2021. Actually, I forgot to announce that at the beginning. We do not have an episode next week. We're taking off, not to take off, but to work on scripted stuff to catch up on that. So we will be releasing before the next Valar Rereadis. We should have out the Giants episode, the first one, that is. Also, super chat from Nina, last VRR of 2020, which that's the comment that reminded me to point that out. So thanks, Nina. Noga Frankel says, I am not sure Asha is correct about herself being worthless as a hostage. She thinks about herself as a ruler, not as a bride. She can give legitimacy to any lowborn new lord. That's a good point. That is a very good point. Just having princess as in her title means something. We see that even with Theon, right? Theon is a shell of what he once was, yet introduced to Lady Barbary, he's still the rightful lord of the Iron Islands. That's what he's called. And, you know, he still gets to sit at table for a while until they decide he's not useful anymore. But these noble connections still have value even when they're standard looked down on nobles. Like, people don't look at the Greyjoys on the mainland as super highborn, but they still recognize that title. That title still has power even amidst them. Even it cuts through their prejudice. So we have a little sort of dark humor here. The one named character that we see die. A lot of characters die here, but people with names, only one. And it's Harwood Fell, who fell into the water. Blue lips, unable to stop shivering. That some strong Others vibes there. Reminds us a little bit of Sir Byam, the knight who died at Craster's Keep, talking about how cold he was. It's a very similar description to those afflicted by the Shivers, which was probably a magical disease that ravaged through Westeros in the 60s, I think, during Jaehaerys and Elisand's time. And we have an episode specifically on that with guest Joe Magician. There's this line, what is a knight without a horse? Men riddled, a snowman with a sword. Tree Girl wonders if this relates to the child Snow Knight comment, which is a reference to the Others being made by the children. I think it is. And also, we just had in the Turncloak chapter last week, snowmen being built by the castle dwellers. There was a fat one for Lord Wyman. There was a one-armed one for Harwood Stout, etc. And so these people, it's really dark to see these portrayed as creatures of ice because they might turn into whites later. Interestingly, too, the phrase snowman only appears twice in the entire series. There's other terms for it. We see Snow Knight, like Sansa. I almost called her Sasha. She doesn't use the word snowman when she makes her snow castle. She says Snow Knight and Snow Tower and all these other things, but she never actually says snowman. Snowman, twice, the entire series. And it's this chapter and the last chapter. Isn't that weird? So I don't know if it necessarily means anything, but it's certainly notable.
George wrote them back to back while he was on a little vacation in the snow.
He's building little snow Georges. Another line that's evocative of perhaps the trail of death that this campaign perhaps foreshadows about the others is the line, "A trail of broken wains and frozen corpses." That might be how winter finds a lot more of the North. Maybe minus the frozen corpses part, because those might get up and start walking. I guess they'd still be frozen corpses. They just won't be sitting there. The line, "This king lives in his brother's shadow," it comes up when Asha's thinking about Stannis. Ask Renly what he thinks of living in his older brother's shadow, or rather, dying in his older brother's shadow. Yeah. Justin Massey thinks the Boltons would never be foolish enough to come forth to give battle, which is a reasonable estimation, but he's wrong, as we know, because as tense as things are between the southern and northern portions of Stannis' army, it's probably worse in Bolton's army, right? I would argue that it is worse. As much as the clansmen are laughing at Peasbury and Corlys Penny and arguing with each other, there's no hatred like there is for the Freys. Like, no one in Stannis' army is hated like they are. So that's a pretty big deal. Because that is a reason why the army is going to be sent out. Half of the army is going to emerge from Winterfell to fight Stannis and probably fall into a frozen lake because of the Roose Bolton's afraid of them fighting each other within Winterfell. Archmaester Renny points out a good correction here. In this chapter, a horse breaks its ankle, but horses don't have ankles.
They have cankles.
So,
no, they have neither.
They have, what is it, fetlocks and all these other names, these words that I've forgotten. But yeah, they don't have ankles, apparently. Those bear paw things are real. Those were medieval Swedish things. So that's kind of cool. Also, thanks to Archmaester Renny again, whose copy of the iBooks edition seems like something we need to get our own copy of, because there's all these little tips. Most of them we know already. Like,
yeah, I guess you can get it because you have your iPad.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd be out of luck.
Yeah, these are cool little notes they put in there. Like I said, most of them we know already, but this one we didn't. Here's a good example. This chapter has the first official use of the phrase Crown Lands, which I would have thought would have come way before this. But no, it's just, it had become a phrase in the fandom. People on forums and everyone used it so regularly that people didn't realize that it technically was a made-up phrase. And George adopted it and put it in there. So that's pretty cool.
That is crazy. I had no idea about that.
Yeah. If you search Crown Lands, it's like, oh, it's only in A Dance with Dragons, and then the history books that were published after it. So, yeah, right? So, as we said at the beginning, Asha is kept in chains in her chapter, while up next Dany ends hers in them, though they're made of gold. I asked people if they thought Stannis and Sansa would meet. Oh, is this you? Did you put this?
Yeah, I
was like,
put
I didn't
this.
ask
I was
that.
like, yeah, you started reading my own comment.
Yeah, so
I was just saying that I asked people if they thought Stannis and Sansa would meet, since Sansa is obviously the sort of lady that Stannis would understand a lot better than Asha.
Yeah.
You know? And most people in the chat said they didn't think they would. Dornish Dame said that they think we got a sneak peek when Alys Sand Targaryen met Alaric Stark in Fire and Blood. So, and some said 50-50. Nina, who obviously writes for us, said she is unsure.
Okay. That's
what about you, Aziz?
I like the Alysanne Alaric theory. I certainly noticed that at the time that Alaric talks a lot like Stannis, and Alysanne was very, there's a lot of ways to compare Alysanne to Sansa. Alysanne, like, she's a strong parallel already. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that definitely could be foreshadowing of what it would be like. So I feel like 50-50 is a pretty good guess, but I think there's a good chance Stannis is doomed before she gets there. But again, only a good chance. So I think 50-50 is a pretty good. I think that's about where I'd fall. I do want it to happen, though. I'll say that.
Yeah, I want it to happen too. I think that was something mirrored in the chat too. Is people like, I want it to happen, but it won't.
I mean, there's a lot of people I want Stannis to meet. And a lot of people want Sansa to meet. Like I said, I want Sansa to meet Val. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Maybe it's possible that both those things will happen together, or they'll all be stuck in Winterfell, surrounded by an army of the dead. Well, that's something Stannis is familiar with, being besieged. Let's move on. Daenerys 7. A secret pact by the Red Door, a.k.a. the Harpy, weds the dragon. Sneaky chapter. Big reveal of the Dornishman, and Dany actually gets married to Hisdar. Those are clearly events of significance. They're not super complex on the surface, But the chaos of Dario is a real catalyst for a lot of subtleties. He casts shadows of Rhaegar, just as she's thinking about how he carried off Lyanna, and lots of other things. There's also this dream she has of what might be Jon or Euron, and that's very subtle and not clear. Barristan then tells Dany about her father lusting after Joanna and how Tywin never forgot that, and that's certainly interesting. Is it a moral lesson or a hint of things to come, things that haven't fully come to pass, maybe a little of both? Certainly it leaves us wondering what is next, what's going to portend. We ponder over what this portends. It's like you need to look in the flames to see what's coming. Like this.
The candle was almost gone.
Maybe a bigger flame than that is needed, but yeah, where's Quaithe when you need her? Not quite the sun or the moon, day or night, but it symbolically and literally represents dawn, the end of night. 2 chapters in a row now, and with the one before that where dusk was falling. So, yep, once again, quite a lot of that from the get-go in these chapters, sentence 1. So this is one of those measured candles that we're not super familiar with in the modern world because we have clocks. But they're a certain size that burns at a certain rate so they can track the hours. So Dany is watching this candle knowing that when it expires, that means dawn has come. It's the next day officially, however you want to look at it. So it is very much an hourglass type feel. And she's with Dario and knows how little time she has left with Dario. Nina writes that Dany's chapter relishes in darkness and nighttime. This is when Dany is happiest, when she can be with someone she cares about, when she can kind of, she can't truly forget, but push aside all her huge amounts of worries and cares and huge responsibilities to be just for some simplicity, right? She doesn't have a lot of time for herself. And this could be thematic foreshadowing, right? She is very much faced with something that's been more bluntly stated in Jon's arc. Duty versus love, right? Her duty is to her people. She's chosen the duty for herself, to be fair. It isn't something that was thrust on her, but she does take it seriously. She doesn't really waver on that. But she also doesn't put it secondary, right? It's number one. She wants to have a relationship. She wants to be happy. She wants to be somewhat normal in terms of having a partner, having being loved, having gratification, things like that. Normal things, right? But it's difficult for her. Even this simple thing is fraught with politics, fraught with the potential to make new enemies. But it's much deeper than that, too. If we're talking about Jon and Dany being in a romantic relationship, potentially later, they also have to make these great sacrifices, and they probably will have to sacrifice that as well, one or both of them. And so it kind of sets that up. Jon's done that with Ygritte. Dany didn't necessarily cause Drogo's death. I mean, she technically did, but she didn't cause him to be in a coma. She didn't cause that great wound of his. So she's been through it a little bit as well. But the dying candle itself and the coming of dawn, those are really good symbols towards the long night, and how maybe the candle that burns twice as bright only burns half as long. If we expect Dany to not live through the series, then that means she will have died a teenager, most likely, making her a candle that burns very bright for a short amount of time. And, well, if that candle can light up the long night, if it can bring light to the darkness, it's worth it. It's a great candle. Good job, candle. Right? So that's a really deep symbolism here, really potent, I think, really strong. Her standing up as that light, and Jon as well. So she actually, of course, gets married to Hisdar in this one at the end. A big deal of the actual ceremony isn't made. It's a 4-hour ceremony, but we don't see much of what happens. It's mentioned that she gets her feet washed, and then she emerges with the wrist and ankle fetters made of gold. But Dario really is more of a focus here. Maybe not him as a person, but what he represents. So maybe focus isn't even the right word. Maybe catalyst is the right word. Let's talk about him for a minute. Here's a quote of Dany herself making a kind of a comparison between her two lovers.
Khal Drogo had been her sun and stars, But he had been dead so long that Daenerys had almost forgotten how it felt to love and be loved. Dario had helped her remember. I was dead and he brought me back to life. I was asleep and he woke me.
That is a very interesting choice of words there. I was asleep and he woke me. Is that like wake the dragon language? I was dead and he brought me back to life. Thinking about Khal Drogo. Yeah. I mean, she's saying Dario did that, but Khal Drogo's life was the one burned on the pyre. Well, I guess he was already dead, but still, symbolically, her being dead and being brought back to life certainly seems to have happened in another way when she went into the fire, which should have killed her. And she thinks about Dario. She's not fooled, right? She's into him, but she's not mistaken about the kind of man he is. She thinks he has a sellsword's conscience, she realized then. That is to say, none at all. So she's not fooled by him. She's not, I mean, she is somewhat naive, but she's not completely naive, obviously. This is a good lesson to learn, even if the way she learned it was somewhat harsh. She didn't, Brown Ben Plum was one way she learned this lesson. Now, Dara's made a variety of suggestions about how this relationship could work. None of them are very good suggestions, and none of them understand Dany's nature, right? He's trying to just make it about them being together and about maintaining that light as long as possible. It's kind of selfish because he's not really taking into consideration what she really wants. He's not listening to her in that her people come first. He's basically arguing for her to not put her people first. That's basically the conception of his arrangement for their relationship. And then, of course, that's never going to work, because she's above her desires. She recognizes them, wants to satisfy them, but this is too far. She's not going to marry this guy. If going this far is a mistake, and it might be, meaning sleeping with him at all, marrying him would compound the mistake and make it much larger. Her goals are political, her goals are humane, and marrying him is very destructive to those goals. So he suggests another arrangement. Marry him, marry his daughter, go ahead, but keep me as a concubine. He says we could always just, take care of his daughter later or something like that. The opposite is basically is sort of what happens, right? Dario becomes a bit of a problem under the peace. He's just war and woe. More like war and woe. Stop doing that. He kisses her in open court. He makes all these comments. He's not subtle about their relationship. She doesn't give him the impression that they could have a relationship on the down low. Like if he was real solid, quiet about it and like subterfuge about it, they could maybe do it. But he's just broadcasting their relationship, which is very much the opposite of how it could work. So basically, Dany vanishes, and Dar is kind of like, well, we could deal with her at a later time. That later time has come when she flies off, trying to push her aside. So Galaza Galara is the first one to point out the insult. Dany really dodges it in court by making it seem like she was talking about Brown Ben and not Dario. But it comes up throughout the chapter. Barristan's upset about it. Galaz is upset about it. Dany herself is upset about it. She can't control this guy. But it's rude too. It's defiant. It's rude. They're setting up this important, fragile peace deal, and this dude is just trampling all over it, acting like it's no big deal. So it is a problem. Barristan segues a conversation about Dany's parents because she was wondering, how did they deal with this? You were around my parents. Did they have love affairs? What's the deal there? That's a really interesting segue because, of course, yes, her parents' relationships were interesting, but her brother's relationship is the really interesting one. But, well, let's see how the scene plays out. So they married for duty. Her parents did, as she is about to, and so did her brother. But were there other paths available, like loves they turned down? And the answer, of course, is yes. And she's thinking about Quentyn as someone she had to turn down. So it's a really cool how all these things come together, all these versions of this from the past with what's happening in the present. Barry doesn't want to, he's a little hesitant to tell her the truth, but he does want to educate her on this lesson, right? He doesn't want her to go down the same route he saw, well, some of the kings he worked for prior. For example, Aerys. Here we go. Rather, not Aerys. First Rhaella, then we'll go Aerys.
As a girl, though, She was once smitten with a young knight from the Stormlands who wore her favor at attorney and named her Queen of Love.
Now, we brought this up before back in Harrenhal because Sir Bonifer Hasty is the man that's being referred to here, and he is now in charge of Harrenhal in the interim. He's a very devout, pious man now. Losing Rhaella did that to him. It was somewhat Jorah-like without the creepiness. In other sense, it's very un-Jorah-like. So, that's really important. Like, so Rhaella had a guy she was into, but of course that could never happen. And then Aerys is a trickier subject because, well, anytime you get into talking about Aerys, the chance is that he's going to have to bring up his mental issues, and the fact that he was just a bad guy. Like, he raped their mother, right? He burned people alive. He was a bad person, right? He was also unstable. You don't want to hear that about your family, even if it's true. Barristan doesn't want to have to tell her that news, but he's also got to do his duty. She asked, and he realizes that this lesson might be important for her because, frankly, he brings up Tywin's revenge, Tywin's jealousy, Tywin's pride. When Joanna was touched by Aerys inappropriately during the bedding of Tywin and Joanna's wedding, Barristan remarks that Tywin never forgot about that. And look what Tywin ended up doing. He killed the kids. He killed all this stuff, right? It was a terrible revenge that he took. When he took it, it was a long time coming. It was savage and brutal and bloody. Barristan doesn't want that kind of seed planted in Dany's regime. He doesn't want any powerful lord getting upset with Dany for her extramarital affairs. And Hizdar does express frustration about this later to Barristan's face. He's like, you telling me about being with somebody else when she's just in open court making out with Dario? Are you kidding me right now, you hypocrite? So, I mean, he's got a point, Hizdar does. I agree with him on very little, but if Dany's doing that in open court, what's the big deal about Hizdar having someone on the side that's kept on the down low, right? Well, the problem with that is that he's doing it with slaves, but that's a different subject. So, anyway, but the point is, Barristan doesn't want Dany to fall into these same traps, these same love interests that turn out to be politically toxic or dangerous. So, but also it speaks to some theories. Now, personally, I don't think this is Tyrion Targaryen evidence, or if it is, it's nothing we didn't already know. We knew Aerys desired Joanna. We knew he touched her. But this was during Tywin and Joanna's wedding. Nothing happened sexually. Like, they didn't sneak off and make Jaime and Cersei while no one was looking. Nah. This is just further evidence of the friction between them. I think it's about the moral lesson for Dany, the political lesson for Dany. So I don't think, as much as I am open to the idea of Tyrion Targaryen kind of guy, I don't think this is really on that track, though I can see why you might think that. And it's funny to think about, too, that Dany is, funny in an ironic way, that Dany is sitting there thinking about, yeah, well, sure would be nice if Dario rode up here romantically at sword point, carried me off, so I didn't have to marry Hizdar. But, of course, Dany is being short-sighted with that one. And it's just a childish fantasy. She doesn't really want that. She's just thinking about it, kind of daydreaming. But the point is, though, that Rhaegar and Lyanna, it didn't go well. However that really went down, whether there was a sword point involved or not, that relationship caused all sorts of turmoil and chaos. So it's definitely not something to emulate, right? In terms of the fallout from all that. But it is something that happened a lot of times in Targaryen history. Dany's not nearly unique along these lines. Rhaegar and Lyanna aren't unique in those lines. I mean, Duncan the Small, right? Duncan the Small forsook his whole inheritance, the throne, the Iron Throne. He gave up the Iron Throne so he could marry Jenny of Oldstones. And then his brothers and sisters, well, not all of them, but a lot of them did the same thing. Married for love. And that caused all sorts of chaos and turmoil as well. Aegon V's reign had that awful ending of Summerhall. Of course, one of the things that brought all this up was Quentin's just all out of nowhere showing up and saying, hey, want to marry me instead? I'm Prince Frog. And it's a strong moment with really unlucky timing. And if you think about it from Dany's perspective, it's straightforward. It's like, what's she going to do? abandon. She has to abandon the Myronese if she's going to marry Quentin. This is not going to happen. She's not going to screw over these people she promised to protect. She's not going to bolt from Meereen just because Dorne has promised to marry her. It does not solve the problem. It's useful. It's good. It helps her future goals, but it's poorly timed. But also from Quentin's point of view, man, he gets laughed at. He's crossed the world to do all this, and he lost friends, and he knows how important this is for his country. It's what a way for it to, well, it doesn't end here. What a way for it to seemingly end, for him to get there, to make it through all this danger, to suffer at Astapor, only to have her kind of laugh at the absurdity of it. She's not laughing at him. She's not laughing because he's not handsome. She's not laughing like Daario making fun of him. She's laughing because of the irony, because of this ridiculous timing of it all. Of the, you got to be kidding me! Right now, of all days, you reveal yourself, right? So it's rueful laughter. It's not mocking laughter, but nonetheless, Quentin has got to crush him, and it's part of why he makes such drastic moves afterwards. And he brings up 50,000 spears and swords. He says, Dorne is 50,000 spears and swords. Is it, though? Probably not. Quentin isn't lying on purpose. He's just been misinformed. Doran says, we exaggerate how many men we have to make, so our foes don't, get any ideas. So it's probably closer to 30,000. But math, whatever. It's a lot less than 50. Let's just leave it at that. So Barristan focuses on what this means, too, because Barristan was like, wow, how this pact, this secret pact between the Sea Lord of Braavos, Viserys, all this stuff. He's like, you got to be kidding me. It's amazing that no wonder they kept it quiet, because Robert would have gone down to Sunspear and broke some stuff. He would have gone bloody. He would have gotten violent if he had found out about this. But, of course, he didn't. He never did. He, in fact, wonders if what happened with Aegon and Rhaenys would happen to the Martell children. Would have happened, back in the early 80s. So Barristan is probably, we don't have his thoughts on this again later, but he would have been, what a moral conundrum for him. He may have been the guy told to lead this assault on Dorne, and if it results in dead princes and princesses, I don't know, he wouldn't like that. So I guess he's one of the many things he can be thankful for not having to deal with. And of course, getting back to Dany's thoughts on this, she immediately recognizes the quaithness of this. We got the sun's son, and she's already been thinking about Resnack as the perfume seneschal, and thinking about the other ways that this prophecy might come true, looking for the particular examples, like who's the Dark Flame, who's the Kraken, these other names that are coming up. But she was told by Quaithe to trust none of them. So it's a under-the-radar reason for her to reject the marriage for that reason as well, even though it's not like she needs more reasons. But if she wasn't about to marry Hisdar, she might have that conundrum to deal with. She's like, Quaithe told me not to trust even this guy. So, George uses the interruption trick. Again, the interruption trick. As Barristan is telling Dany family history, which we're like, yeah, tell us about your family history. Yeah, tell us. Freaking Hisdar Lorak rides up and is like, hey, y'all, what's up? Shut up. Get out of here, Hisdar. We're hearing about Targaryen history, man. Gah. Anyway, that's George for you. He loves to do that to us. So, but I don't know that everyone recognized it as that. So, I one day I should count all the times George interrupts lore with something, because it's a lot of times. The symbolism of the chains, we should talk about that for a minute. I think it sort of stands out as somewhat straightforward. Everything about Dany's arc has been about slavery. First of all, she's a slave to start off with, in essence, right? And she's sold to Drogo. She's the princess that was promised to Drogo. She's slowly turning into the princess that was promised of prophecy. So she is personally a slave that won her freedom, then took that freedom and turned it around to free others. And now she's chained. That's a step back. No doubt it's a step back. It's going to seem as a step back. It's meant to look as one. Yes, the chains are gold, but they're chains. They're still chains. They hold you back just as much. Arguably, they hold you back more because they're freaking heavy. Gold is heavy as hell. So, as Joe puts it, they are trappings of the soul. As just like anything else, she is now tied to this city in a way she never imagined she would be, but she's doing it because it's part of the journey, part of doing the thing that she set out to do. She expected to overthrow all these leaders, turn all this slavery upside down. The reality is, like the problem with Mormonts and Greyjoys, is going to take more than a few relationships to fix this. It's going to take generations. It's like the olive tree thing. We talked about that way back, and the olive trees were destroyed. It'll take 30 years for those olive trees to be productive again. And that's the kind of regular food supply that's required for the city to thrive. There's no rushing towards that. There's no shortcut past that. You can't make these things grow faster. Whether they're plants, there's only so much sunlight and water and nutrients you can pour into them to make them grow fast. There's kind of a maximum. Same thing with cultural upheaval and getting over these old pains and traumas and distrust. I think distrust is probably the biggest thing that needs to be gotten over. And, well, speaking of what's coming and what Dany isn't fully aware of, things that are foreshadowed, this is a really interesting and dark moment in her dream here.
Beneath her coverlets, she tossed and turned, dreaming that Hisdar was kissing her, but his lips were blue and bruised, and when he thrust himself inside her, his manhood was cold as ice. She sat up with her hair disheveled and the bedclothes a tangle. Her captain slept beside her, yet she was alone.
And she
Real
later
quick,
I'm sorry.
I got Casanova drooling all over me while I read that. It is a wet situation over here.
He's got blue lips. So she later thinks of the Warlocks, which is on the right track because this might be about Euron, this quote, and he's the one who absconded with the Warlocks' artifacts and revenge plot and Shade of the Evening, which makes lips blue. But manhood cold as ice kind of pushes things in the other direction. Euron has an association with the others somewhat, or might have a bigger one later, but that almost sounds like being undead, right? Which Euron is not, as far as we know. It doesn't seem to be. So it could be like maybe Jon, who will be dead, and that might turn his lips a little blue. But I lean more towards Euron here. The Warlocks thing is certainly seems to fit a little better, but it's a little puzzling. So something that I asked a lot of y'all to weigh in on, and basically similar levels of confusion along the same lines as what I say here. For example, Nina says there's some Euron-y and othery overtones here. Euron is literally introduced as having blue and bruised lips. It's just basically the same language. He's kind of on his way to claim her via Victarion. He's not specifically coming, but he did send someone for her to marry her, to take her. So whether or not they succeed, it's certainly happening. The plot is definitely afoot. So, and if Euron is the guy to break the wall down, then that's his association with the others, even if he's not a literal other himself. Not to mention the idea, the theory that he's a failed green seer trainee, which brings in some old gods magic, gives him some old gods vibes, things like that. And of course, the others are slavers, right? The others are eldritch slavers, controlling the dead. And the more we learn about the dead, we learn that there is some memory, some sense of self still there, which makes the whole thing more terrifying. That if they were just inanimate walking corpses, that's terrifying enough. But if they also have a sense of who they are, if they're remembering and they're just completely controlled like puppets, it just makes the whole thing so much more terrifying and sad and like, oh my God, they must be destroyed. The others must be destroyed. It's worse than an abomination. And Euron is also kind of a bridge between these concepts of slavery, the old school regular slavery, and using magic to enslave people on a grand scale. So, which fits in with the conception of him as trying to be like a new god king, right? Which the Valyrian version of that was big into slavery, as we well know. Let's see here. Sentient Dildo sends a super chat. What a name. A gold coin from longtime lurker. Happy holidays. Thank you very much.
I want to say extra thank you to Sentient Dildo because they were in my chat about The Expanse on Saturday.
Right on.
Lots
yeah.
of good comments.
Good time to shout that out, by the way, y'all. Ashea and Kyle Foster over on the Fandom Media channel are doing reviews of Expanse Season 5. Of course, they're the first. There's 4 episodes out, so 2 episodes because the first 3 episodes all drop together. So every Friday at 9 Central, they'll be going live. And, of course, you can catch the streams afterwards if you can't make them live. That's 9 Eastern. Dany tells Quentin to enjoy her wedding day, which is similar to the concept of one last taste of life as she mentions the siege, etc. She meaning her own siege. She's like, I'm besieged here. You know, I might die tomorrow. Who knows? Like, I know you traveled all this way to make this marriage proposal, but look, it's my wedding day. Be happy for me. Let's deal with the problems some other time. You know, there may not be another time. You know, let's be happy while we can. So I appreciate that sentiment being expressed. It's actually quite wise for such a young person to say something like that. And like I said, it comes up. It's come up a lot recently. That sentiment. The Theon expresses it about how the Ironborn have one last taste of life before going into battle. He expressed that about Wyman Manderly, who is probably doing that as he's serving cannibal pie to people, expecting to die himself in the near future. Dany also wears her floppy ears as she's preparing to be Myronese, to pretend to be Myronese, which is a nice little segue to what's going on in the next chapter, which features lots of rabbit holes. Floppy ears, rabbit holes. Yep, those things go together nicely. John 9, the princess and the queen and the fool and the banker, a.k.a. Alys in Wun-Wunderland. We had some association to fairy tales in Dany 7 with the Frog Prince of Grimm's fairy tales, also most prominent. This chapter has a lot of rabbit holes, like I said, given the association to Wonderland. Alys in Wonderland, of course, features Alys going to Wonderland via a rabbit hole. It's the origin of the phrase, right? Rabbit hole, the phrase going into the rabbit hole comes from Alys in Wonderland. That is, we all owe homage to Lewis Carroll for that phrase becoming a part of the modern vernacular, especially in A Song of Ice and Fire, especially in Valar Rereadis. Boy, we use that phrase a lot. And, well, Alys in Wonderland was published in 1865. So, right on. There's at least one slender thread of influence they share. In one scene, the Queen of Hearts is having workers paint some roses red after accidentally making them white. This is a reference to the white and red roses of the Wars of the Roses fought between the Lancasters and the Yorks, who are a loose influence to the Lannisters, red, and the Starks, white. Stark, York, Lannister, Lancaster. Starks have a white direwolf. Lannisters have red and gold. Yep. There you go. Replacing roses with animals is fitting as well, as Alys in Wonderland is a story full of anamorphic creatures. The Cheshire Cat may be grinning because he has the wealth of Casterly Rock. There's no Mad Hatter, but we do have Patchface. He might fit in pretty well in Wonderland, a place rather suited for seemingly nonsensical but potentially meaningful ramblings, uttered at high volume. Rather than the Queen of Hearts, we have the Queen of Flaming Heart. Instead of a miniature world, we have an actual giant. Instead of Alys, A-L-I-C-E, we have Alys, A-L-Y-S. Even before we see either Alys or the Queen of the Flaming Heart, we start off with, well, actually, we do see the Queen of the Flaming Heart right away. She's the first line of the first 2 words of the chapter. And, well, this line isn't maybe as whimsical as Wonderland. It's very out of the ordinary for the Wall.
Queen Selyse descended upon Castle Black with her daughter and her daughter's fool, her serving girls and lady companions, and a retinue of knights, sworn swords, and men-at-arms 50 strong.
And that doesn't even include the banker. Jon specifically doesn't have enough quarreling parties to try and balance out how he has another. Right? There's so many people at the wall who don't get along with each other or with him, and now there's more of that. And really, so Patchface is the fool, but Jon is the juggler. He's got to juggle all these personalities and people. Is this a sign of things to come? More and more people coming to the wall as this part of the story becomes more important to the rest of the world? Meaning as more and more of Westeros learns what's going on, they throw their hat in the ring? It's been important to us since the prologue. But as we well know, very few characters around the world elsewhere have even taken notice, let alone lent a hand. This is perhaps some more Dany, Jon chapter mirroring. Though even first-time readers see it coming far in advance, Dany and her court are shocked to find a Dornish prince in their midst. So too is it a bit surprising for Jon to have so many visitors. Though Queen Selyse showing up is not unexpected, Tycho and Astoris and Alys Karstark surely were. And on the other hand, the people showing up, the arriving visitors, were very surprised to find, say, a giant at the wall as well. Dany's going to have some more surprise visitors as well, even though Quaithe gave her hints. Well, Quaithe wasn't super specific about who, say, the Dark Flame is, or the Kraken, or these things like that. Especially not like, she only gotten the Sun's Son and the Pale Mare. Like, she's only got like 3 of those names so far. Anyway, one option about someone who could show up at the wall relates to Dany, because Jon says jokingly that a dragon on the wall would be nice because it could warm things up a bit. It's not the first time he's made a joke like that. One time he said a dragon or 3 would be nice. 3, yeah. Of course, that might be the wrong wish, because a dragon could be the reason the wall falls, like if it warms things up too much. Either way, let's assume the wall falls at some point, whether it's because of a dragon or some other thing. One way or the other, the others have a way through with their army. So timing is an issue here. When the others get through the wall, is it going to be well defended? The other is like some climactic event where people are trying to stop them, but they get through anyway? Or is it more like the world is not focused on that? Most people are still fighting in the north or in the south. They're not paying attention, and the others get through while there's hardly anyone at the wall. It could be some of both. That's a big question, big rabbit hole. Either way, I expect more and more important characters to head north, right? They may not go to the wall. Maybe they just go to Winterfell. Maybe they go to White Harbor, wherever the front lines are. And we don't know where they're going to be. But that is where I expect people to be showing up. And the mixing and mingling of different types of people is going to continue to enhance, which might enhance the level of friction we see from these people who don't normally like to work together. Selyse and her party are going to head off pretty quickly here in this chapter. They go to rest. So for the most part, their appearance in this chapter is brief. It sets up the rest of the book when there's a lot more thorough, important conversations. But something to point out here in this initial meeting is that during the meeting of Wun-Wun, a knight says he thought the giants were all dead. And then we get this line from Patchface: "In the dark, the dead are dancing." That sounds maybe straightforward, and that the others, they who raise the dead, thrive in darkness. It also harkens to the prologue of A Game of Thrones itself, the first chapter, when Sir Waymar, bravely facing his fate and the others, says, "Dance with me then." Speaking of prophecy, the major reason that Queen Selyse is even here is her faith in Melisandre. Her husband is Stannis, but she stands Melisandre. As we discussed earlier, Mel says Eastwatch will be hit hard. Whether that's true or not, Selyse believes it because she has faith in Melisandre. So if Melisandre says Eastwatch isn't safe, no one will convince her otherwise. Only Melisandre herself could change her mind. So this could backfire pretty badly, or it could work out pretty well. It's another good example of something that could go either way. If Eastwatch turns out to be fine, and Castle Black, because of Wun-Wun and Sir Patrick and Jon getting stabbed, that fallout could go really badly for Selyse and her people. But it might go really well because Eastwatch could really be hammered hard. We talked about the possibility that Melisandre might be right despite being wrong, but Eastwatch really could be damaged badly. So I could see either of those things happening. And then she's going to try to go to the Night Fort. Like, talk about a place where nothing could possibly go wrong at the Night Fort. So it's like Selyse's 3 choices are all pretty grim, I guess. One person who definitely will regret going from Eastwatch to Castle Black is Sir Patrick of King's Mountain. He's the guy that steps forward with steel in hand when Wun-Wun is laughing. He's like, oh, he's laughing. Pull your sword out, right? Jon says, you do not want to anger him. Cue the screen popping up saying, Sir Patrick angers Wun-Wun. Yeah, because he's going to. But that's at the end of the book. The reference here is George's friend Patrick Saint Denis, who is a Canadian writer, and he had a bet with George, and he won the bet, but in George manner, he made it look like he lost the bet. The bet was a Dallas Cowboys, New York Giants bet, and well, if you look at Sir Patrick's sigil, it's a blue star on a white field, which is the sigil of the Dallas Cowboys. Logo of the Dallas Cowboys. And, of course, we've already talked about how Wun-Wun is number 11, Phil Simms of the New York Giants. So George lost the bet, and so he had to put Patrick in his book, but, he had Sir Patrick killed by the giant, sort of to get him back for losing the bet, I guess. So a little joke there. It's a really good setup for the rest of the arc. There's so much tension here, right? We talked about how much tension there already was, but goodness, the increase of tension, you really didn't think it could get worse. But Selyse is just so like prim and arrogant and prideful, and and her knights reflect that attitude. They're just ready for a fight. You can see the temperature of this pot getting boily. I'll just talk about giants and the dead too, by the way. I'm looking forward to undead giants. I'm not looking forward to Wun-Wun being an undead giant. I hope that doesn't happen. But just undead giants in general. That sounds cool. Last chapter, rather not the last chapter, but in Asha's chapter with Stannis, we mentioned the Golden Dawn. That phrase was used by George. Again, there's a Golden Dawn in this chapter, which I think is a hint that these things are happening simultaneously. The Golden Dawn of that day in Asha's chapter is the Golden Dawn of this day. So I think it's the same day. Golden Dawn is not a phrase that comes up much, so it's a bit of a clue. Joe cites this brief quote, across the yard, the king's tower had turned into a hulking shadow, the lights in its windows obscured by falling snow. Great symmetry here. Stannis is cooped up in a tower you can barely see for the snow, and it's the same for his wife, because Stannis is in that watchtower at the lake, Crofters Village, where Selyse is here in a similar spot. I did not notice that. Good catch, Joe. Earlier on, Jon makes mention of how the snows had gone south. Well, we certainly saw that. It's yet again the small casual mentions turning large on us. And when he and Tycho finish their negotiating, the snow's already started back up, though, at the wall. It's just, well, that's winter in the north. So he asks Tycho about Sam and what's going on there. He's still worried about them. He doesn't know. He's like, well, they're probably safe in Old Town by now. And yeah, well, they are in Old Town by now, but not necessarily safe. Jon's fear that Selyse will mistake him for a stable boy and hand him the reins of her horse is reminiscent of the Hedge Knight, Nina points out, when Aerion, as in Aerion Brightflame, the one who eventually drinks Wildfire, does the same thing to Dunk. He sees Dunk standing there, thinks he's a stable boy, and orders him to take care of his horse. And Dunk's like, yo, I'm a knight. And, well, he's not a knight at that point, but he pretends to be. And he's not a stable boy, so either way. It's a great parallel. Good catch by Nina there. It's also a perfect example of what Melisandre was talking about. You know who doesn't get mistaken for stable boys? People who wear the trappings of power, right? No one's going to mistake Melisandre for a stable girl, right? Because of all her lavish robes and her warmth emanating off of her. No one's going to mistake her for that. Jon is mistaken not just because of his youth, but because of his plainness. He doesn't adorn himself. He brought a few guards to give himself a little more authority, but even that didn't really work. That wasn't above the bar of what Selyse was expecting. It was still like, who is this dude? He's clearly just some servant. So exactly proof of what Melisandre's been saying, and I think it's really clever by George to put that in there, slide that in there to show us an example of it. I don't know that Jon even realized what happened there. He doesn't think of this. Well, that's what Melisandre was telling me about. Yeah, but we caught it. We certainly did. Tycho and Astoris. Let's talk about Tycho. That's a pretty big deal. This arrangement for to feed them through winter. It's incredible how this huge turn. I mean, Stannis hasn't made his deal with Tycho yet, but we know he's going to. And Jon is already realizing what a big deal it is. And what a strange place for that to happen. We haven't seen much of the South in this book. It's mostly the Feast for Crows really featured it, and Dance with Dragons is featuring pretty much all the other locations. So here in the North, at the Wall, one dude shows up, and Jon's like, whoa, that might be it for the Lannisters. What? Yeah, that's how big a deal Tycho and Astoris, that's how big a deal this infusion of money is. And not just the infusion of money, but the fact that the Iron Bank is now an enemy of Cersei. That's perhaps even bigger of a deal. Because whenever the Iron Bank turns on someone, that someone tends to lose. We don't have an opposite example. I don't think we know of a single time where the Iron Bank was like, you are our enemy. And, well, the Iron Bank always has its due. That's their line, right? Just like the Lannisters always pay their debts, the Iron Bank will have its due. Nina points out a nice reference to the Accursed Kings here. Another example of bankers playing a huge role in large-scale wars. Edward II had huge debts to the Italian bankers. Roger Mortimer shows up with Isabella to say, hey, we want some more credit, but we're not going to be responsible for the current king's debts when we're trying to overthrow him. And the banker's like, well, if you want to get a loan from us, you will be. If you take care of their debts after overthrowing them, we'll help you overthrow them. But otherwise, we're not going to help you. That's very similar here. It's also somewhat standard parlance in power playing and financing, but the specific details are so familiar to this example, and George is such a huge fan of the Accursed Kings that it feels like a possible influence here. So if we return to dragons, though, that comes up in this conversation. Tycho indicates how his people don't jape of dragons, nor would they likely back one were Stannis to die. So, but would they, right? This is such a huge conundrum. Does the Iron Bank support Dany because she's anti-slavery, or be against her because she's pro-dragon? I tend to lean on the latter, because I think I'm a little cynical about the higher-ups in the Iron Bank actually sincerely hating slavery that much to the point that they're willing to sacrifice some of their substantial wealth for it. I don't know if I'd go that far. It's the same sort of cynicism we have about the Iron Bank in terms of its connections to the Faceless Men, which it just so happens we'll be talking about that a bit more in the next chapter. Back to here, though. So who would they back, though? Let's say Stannis dies and they don't back Dany. Who do they back? They're not just going to be like, all right, we're done. No one to back. Young Griff? Euron? I mean, who? It's tricky, right? Who do they back after if they don't? So that perhaps that is an argument for them backing Dany, because who else is there? But it could be Young Griff. That's an interesting possibility. They may turn around and go to him. We'll see. Jon thinks the loan contract is simple. on the other hand, but that worries him. Quote,
Tycho Nestoris had left behind a copy of their agreement. Jon read it over thrice. That was simple, he reflected. Simpler than I dared hope. Simpler than it should have been. It gave him an uneasy feeling. Braavosi coin would allow the Night's Watch to buy food from the south when their own stores ran short, food enough to see them through the winter, however long it might be. A long, hard winter will leave the watch so deep in debt that we will never climb out, Jon reminded himself. But when the choice is debt or death, best borrow.
What a powerful line. It seems simple enough, but that is what so many people have faced, and that is effectively debt slavery, right? So the choice is slavery or death. If you phrase it that way, a lot of people would be like, well, maybe death is the better option. This isn't quite that far. Debt slavery is not true slavery, at least not in this sense, although it can be. But either way, he's not wrong to be wary. He lacks the experience in finance and banking and loans and all that to understand the ins and outs, the specific details. But he's right to suspect he just got raked over the coals. I bet he got crushed by those terms. I bet Tycho Nestoris, who is savvy, experienced, enough to know that Jon isn't savvy or experienced, he's like, this is a kid. This is like a lender sitting down with someone getting ready to get college loans. Right? You don't know what you're doing when you get loans when you're 18 a lot of times. I didn't. I bet a lot of y'all didn't. Some of us had parents, family to maybe help us out to steer around some of the rapids of debt. But so many of us got into debt when we were young. So many of us still have that debt, right? Not all lending people are bad, right? In the real world, not all lending businesses are evil. But there's a lot of it. There's a lot of capitalizing. There's a lot of taking advantage of people's naivete. I mean, the history of teenagers and credit is a history of predation, right? Not 100% of the time, but a really high percentage of the time. And it's part of the issue is that they're in a similar spot. When you're 18, you want to go to college. What are your choices? Debt or no college? So that's what's happening here. Jon's like, it's not college, but it's the choices are limited, and the lender knows that. The lender knows your choices are limited and uses that as leverage in negotiations. So I do have a lot of cynicism about the Iron Bank. We've elaborated on it elsewhere. I'm not sure how to judge this scenario entirely, though I do recommend you listen to some of our other work on the Iron Bank, Fire and Blood episode on them, and we've talked about them in other places throughout Valar Rereadis. Now, on one hand, lenders usually don't give money to businesses that are unprofitable, that are losing money. Banks aren't keen on giving money to people who are starving, because that doesn't sound like the kind of situation that they're going to get out of. Like, usually you lend someone money because they have a great idea that they can't afford to put into action, like a new product that could hit market and make them all a lot of money. Lending people money to make rent, that's a good way to not get your money back. On the other hand, the wall is like, where does the wall get money from? Where's their profit coming in? How are they going to ever pay this back? Well, on the other hand, the wall has been around 8,000 years. So yeah, maybe they're going to have money problems, but they're going to be there. They're not going to vanish. They're not going to go belly up. They're going to go out of business owing their creditors. That's just not really possible. Actually, they could, though, because if the wall is destroyed, there's no wall. There's no organization to pay this loan back. But Braavos isn't aware of that. So Braavos isn't aware of the threat of the others. To them, this is an ancient institution that's been there forever. And to them, that might make it a solid investment. Not just that, but the Lords of the North have pride in the wall. They take care of the wall. If they were to find out that the wall was in debt, they might help out. They might send some cash. That's the kind of thing Tycho Nestoris would be aware of as well, because that's a long-standing tradition, unlike the others, which is a recent development. So much of Westeros is in the same situation with winter coming on, and Jon thinks about buying food from the south. So pay close attention to this. The food might be even more expensive than they borrowed money for. Think about what's happening in the Vale. Littlefinger is playing huge debt games with the grain supply and expecting to make a killing without any compassion, of course, because it's Littlefinger. He's expecting to make people pay enormous sums for whatever food they're going to buy. So these plot lines could come crashing together. It might even have an impact on Sansa's desire to go north if she realizes or understands that Littlefinger is playing financial games with her home when they're starving. Well, it's not like Sansa doesn't have lots of reasons for eventually turning on Littlefinger, but hey, there's yet another one. And it's a great part of Arya's story comes up here. It's again examples of Jon being just so wrong, but in funny ways. Like he's like, it sure would be good if Arya was far away from all this pain and suffering and war in Westeros. Maybe Braavos, but maybe that's not far enough. And he's like, and she's probably helpless. And it's like, no, she is not helpless. That's pretty good. Also in the negotiation, the ships, that's pretty important. He needs Tychonosaurus' ships, which is interesting to me. I wonder about that. He borrows the ships. He intends to give them back, but they might not make it back. So I'm sure Tycho can find another way home, maybe with Justin Massey. But it's worth mentioning. Tycho also mentions reports of strange ships in the Stepstones. It might be Salador Saan, but he's dubious. It could be Orain Waters, but it could also be Victarion's fleet sailing to Marine, but they would probably recognize Greyjoy Krakens. I considered Euron ships as a possibility since they don't fly the Greyjoy Kraken. They fly his new like Raven banner, and most people don't know that banner yet. But I don't think Euron ships are all the way in the Stepstones. That's too far away from where he's operating right now. So it could be the Golden Company's ships, the ships that are bringing the Golden Company over. That, especially since we've already heard news of them at least and stuff like that, which is pretty near the Stepstones. So that would fit. Axel Florent. So we talk about Euron in this chapter, and well, Axel isn't as bad as Euron, but he's up there. He commodifies Val pretty horribly, just as insults everyone, just as a jerk. We already know who he is. He does the "don't you know who I am" thing, which that's a pretty easy way for readers to not like someone when they pull the "don't you know who I am." That's like a pretty easy way to be like, oh, we don't like that guy. This is the same guy who claims to be able to flame read, and we're like, yeah, right. This is the same guy who floated the plan to rape and pillage Claw Isle. The same guy who threatened to kill Davos if he didn't back the plan to rape and pillage Claw Isle. And yeah, Jon thinks how he wouldn't want to afflict Val with Axel Florent, but honestly, I think Val would just kill Axel in his sleep. I don't know that she needs his help on this one. That's exactly the kind of dude that she would be like, "You're marrying me to him? All right, well, his life has just got a lot shorter." Jon thinks, what sort of man can stand by idly and watch his own brother being burned alive? That is what Axel did. Alistair Florent was burned alive. And now, obviously, Jon would never watch any of his own Stark brothers burn, but what about Night's Watch brothers? Or, he already stopped Mance from being burned, sort of, although that wasn't Mance. But he didn't know that, so he did sort of stop his brother from burning, his sworn brother. All right, let's talk about Alys. Alys Karstark, one of the most immediately likable, sympathetic characters. Like, we don't know her at all, but everything she's gone through, there's no reason to think she's like a bad person, so you pretty much automatically root for her and you appreciate her making it so far. And she's an interesting character, right? She's got strength. She's got family connections that we find interesting. We never thought at any point she would be Arya, even on first read, because Arya's obviously in Braavos. So it's really about Jon's perspective and thinking and feeling sad for Jon that it's not her. But there's huge Lyanna Rhaegar vibes here. Well, Lyanna specifically. It's a little bit of Rhaegar too. After all, that is Jon's dad. So a person who has Lyanna vibes running to a person who is Rhaegar's son. Yeah. Just like Lyanna was not wanting to marry the brute of a man, Robert, Cregan Karstark seems like even worse. Maybe less of a womanizer, but a lot more violent. So definitely worse. So you could easily see why Alys doesn't want to marry her or him. And Lyanna was pretty sure it was all about just Robert, having lust and then her dynastic connections, being a Stark. Also, if we consider the possibility that Nina suggests, I've always liked this idea that Lyanna ran to Rhaegar as much as he came to her, if not entirely, because she saw it as a way to escape her marriage to Robert. They had developed something. They met together, Lyanna and Rhaegar. There were sparks. And so, faced with her forced marriage, she ran off to Rhaegar to say, look, this is the crown prince. This is the one person who has the power to stop this marriage, which is what Alys Karstark is doing. Jon Snow, the one person she perceives as being able to stop this marriage. And she's right. There may have been someone else with the power to stop it. I can't think of one. Not that she could get to. What you gonna do? Run to Dany? Right? Jon Snow is the only person she could think of. So good on her. She got there. And it's also giving us Rhaegar vibes because of the mistaken identity bit, right? Melisandre thought it was Arya. Turns out to be Alys. Rhaegar, a big part of understanding the mystery behind Rhaegar is knowing that he got the ID of the prince that was promised wrong. He later realized that. We know that much. We know that he held up his child, was like, this is the prince that was promised. There must be one more. And so that part he got wrong. But before that, he thought it was himself. So he'd been through this process a bit of okay, no, it's me. No, it's not me. It's one of my kids. Oh, it's not. So this is why he may have thought he had to make a child with Lyanna too. And well, so we got mistaken identity through visions as another parallel to the situation. Not only does it parallel Rhaegar Lyanna, it parallels Serena and Sansa in which we might get in Fire and Blood 2, because those are Rickon Stark's daughters, meaning Rickon's son of Cregan Stark, meaning the old man in the north, from the Dance of Dragons era. His first son died, and he passed on Winterfell to sons of his third wife. So, something happened there. Why didn't Winterfell pass to Rickon Stark's daughters, Serena and Sansa, as I said, were their names? Why did they pass to these sons instead? Perhaps some sort of shenanigans. It may come up in a sort of a she-wolf of Winterfell type situation. Not specifically that, because that was the next generation or 2 generations later. But it may have set the stage for that. So this doesn't just parallel Lyanna Rhaegar. It stands in contrast to another incident mentioned in this chapter, which is Rickard Karstark's treason. All that business. That basically kicked all this off, right? Without Rickard's execution, you don't have this domino effect of destruction and infighting at Carhold. It culminates in her flight in this fantastic line that reminds me vaguely of the opening of, well, Star Wars.
Alys knelt before him, clutching the black cloak. You are my only hope, Lord Snow. In your father's name, I beg you, protect me.
Evoking of Ned's name. That was wise of Alys. Bringing up Ned, right? The Ned's little girl concept we just saw. Ned is revered. And this is Ned's son. Of course, it's not. But Jon thinks he is. He's Ned's son. And invoking his father's name is just a huge way to get him to be like, I got to do the right thing. I must be correct. I must act with honor. I must act with nobility. But it's beautiful writing. Not only does it remind us of Star Wars, but look at the 2 contrasts. She's clutching the black cloak, as the line says, which is the symbol of his duty. But she mentions his father, which is the symbol of his life and who he wants to emulate, and so much of who he's trying to be. So is he going to do his duty, or is he going to be like his father? He can't do both. So it's another beautiful confrontation of duty and love. A different sort of love, not romantic love, but love for his father, love for his family, love for what his father stood for. To look at it another way, this is half the story Barbary Dustin recently shared. The love of an heir of Winterfell taken away by events from down south. Robb and Alys were never given the chance for that kind of attraction to materialize. So that's what I'm referring to, is the fact that for a while there, it might have been Alys Karstark marrying Robb. Rickard was waiting for that chance, mostly waiting for Alys to get a little bit older. So this is all behind the scenes. When Robb instead opts to marry a Frey and then doesn't actually do that, that may have bothered Rickard even more because of things like this, wherein his original plan was to unite their houses. So it may have stung even more the way Robb behaved. Justified or not, it gives us a little extra ammunition for understanding why Rickard just went off so much. But of course, as Alys says, that he's always been like that. He's very dangerous. He's always had a strong vindictive streak, and he's unshy about acting on it. Was, anyway. And Rickard mentioned kinships, and he brought up the concept of kinslaying as a way to not be executed by Robb. He's like, hey man, I'm kin, don't kill me. Alys mentions the kin as well. He says, well, help me, kinsman. He's like, brings up that family connection, which has a lot of weight in the North. It has a lot of weight in general, but particularly in the North. So Robb could have been in his power to pardon Rickard. He could have imprisoned him and waited to deal with him later. There's a lot of ways he could have handled that situation that didn't involve immediate execution. But Robb did what he thought was honorable. He thought what he had to do. He did what he thought was necessary, even if it wasn't pragmatic. And here we have a similar thing. Pushing Jon to compromise his vows, his values. Even with Stannis, Jon could just justify that, well, I don't have much say in what Stannis is doing. Stannis is more powerful. I can't disobey the king. He's got some plausible deniability with the way he's behaved towards Stannis in terms of his duty. The Carhold situation is just clearly outside the scope of his power, his law, his duty. He's breaking the rules. But of course he is. How could he not? What's he going to be like? Sorry, girl. Get the hell out of here. We'll give you some food, but you got to go. Even that, though, even if he gives her food, then that's guest right. He's made her a guest. He can't just kick her out in the cold. Yeah, what's he going to do? Just let her starve to death? Like, it's inhumane. It's ridiculous. It's a good example of duty putting too much burden on her. Like, the edicts of duty here are to let this girl starve and die in the snow. Like, duty is wrong when it asks you to do that. Love is right here. Sometimes duty is right. Love is right here, for sure. So Robb was doing what he thought was right. Killing Rickard Karstark, he thought that was the right thing. And he was thinking of Ned Stark when he did it, for sure. Even though it harmed his cause. Jon, same thing. He's doing what he thinks is right, even if it's not pragmatic, even if it undermines his authority, even if it violates his oath. Because he thinks it's right. What's right matters more than what his oath was. Because his oath didn't take this into account. His oath didn't take into account letting some young girl die. Come on. No way. So it's outstanding how these political and familial struggles keep finding the Wall of all places. The Wall. It's the most isolated, out-of-the-way place in Westeros. I mean, other than maybe, I don't know, some weird place in the middle of the Red Mountains. I don't know, the center of the Farwinds holdings on in the Iron Islands, like the Lonely Light. This is a way the hell out there, and just so many people are showing up, and it's amazing. So, when Jon has to work within his vows, he's still willing to break them. He's doing, because he's clearly puts doing the right thing above any sort of promise he made, which again I agree with. But what happens when he's unrestrained? What happens, assuming this happens, that he dies, becomes free of his vows, and no longer has to contend with that? He's no longer like, well, I can't do that because it conflicts with my vows. If that conflict is gone, he can just kind of act on what he wants. So if he'll be unrestrained and undead, he's 2/3 of the way to Martell. Unrestrained, undead, Unlord Commander? I don't know. Unstark? The Raven talks several times in this chapter. It's one of the more talkative times for the Raven. But unlike a major example last time of the free Corn King, I don't think it actually says anything important this time. It mostly just repeats what it hears, and it's phrases it said before. So I could be missing something, but this is part of the Raven fog. If everything the Raven said was important, we would always listen to it. That would be too much. It needs to say some other things so that we can't always know what to look for. Okay, so again, I'm going to mention The Expanse and plug Ashea and Kyle's show because we have reason to shout out the creators of The Expanse in this chapter. The two men of the Night's Watch that encounter Alys Karstark as she's coming up the road are brothers named Ty and Daniel. It just so happens that the creators of The Expanse, who go by the pseudonym James S.A. Corey, are actually two men, and their names are Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham. Ty and Daniel. It's not a coincidence. That is 99.9% a reference to those two, especially because Ty was one of George's assistants back in the day. Not anymore. Ty is, in fact, the guy that built George's computer, the one that his old WordPerfect DOS machine that he's typed all the books on. Ty Frank put that one together. So another reason to check out The Expanse, because there's a cool connection to them. Karen Sita sends a super chat from Canada, says, hope everyone is having a nice holiday. Thank you, History of Westeros, for doing a live stream this week. Don't forget to hit the like button, y'all. Thank you, Karen Sita. I appreciate that. Yeah, please do hit the like button. It really does help us get picked up by the algorithms. YouTube is a vast expanse of possibilities, and drawing attention to us helps us find new Westorians to dive in and become members of our great fandom. Morley, another super chat. Boy, Maury, you are so generous. For Jakin, Xerxes, Casanova, and Koja, that's our kitties. Those are our 4 cats who Maura is familiar with. We trade cat photos.
This was also, I think, inspired by a photo that I put in the chat that if anyone wants to see, they can see. If you look to your side, Aziz, you will see Jakin is using our mixer as a pillow. I tried to push him off many times, and I decided if he just settles, he's not moving anything.
That is very cute.
Yeah, so I posted a picture in the chat. I'll post it again just in case you weren't in the chat. It's very cute.
Last note for this chapter. Not only does Jon think of Braavos as a place where Arya might go to be safe, but he thinks of sending her to Ib or Lorath, which is also a little bit of under-the-radar humor because Jock and Hagar claim to be from Lorath. One of the marriage names for Arya in Jon's mind, which he's like, well, when he's thinking who Stannis might try to marry her to if she was there, he's like, Justin Massey might be one of them, which is funny because of Justin Massey trying to marry Asha. And Jon thinks, well, Tycho Nestoris, if Arya shows up, I could send her to Braavos with Tycho Nestoris. And that also is a popular fan theory, is that Arya, when she does come back over, it's going to be with Justin Massey because Justin Massey is going to be sent to Braavos by Stannis to collect the money that Tycho loans and then to hire sellswords. So this is all these characters are really well connected and none of them even know each other. That's very cool. Well done, George. Hidden dot connecting. And our last chapter today, The Blind Girl, Daycat, Lighter of the Night Wolf, aka Dressing the Dead in Darkness. That title, if you are unaware, is a reference to the show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which we reference frequently in our titles. There's a song called Dayman, Fighter of the Night Man. In this case, of course, Arya is the Night Wolf, and she also goes by Cat of the Canals. And a cat is her ability to see while blind, so it's Lighter of the Night Wolf, giving it sight. Haha. But of course, Dressing the Dead in Darkness is because of she's a blind coroner in this chapter. We need the silly to balance out the creepiness. That's why I needed that title, because, whoa. I mean, there's nothing wrong with dealing with bodies. It's a job that needs doing. I'm not insulting coroners here, but if you're a coroner that has to do their job by feeling the whole body up and down, that is creepy. I don't think blind people go into that business. Maybe I'm wrong, but I wouldn't. It's pretty brave, really. It's getting over that kind of squeamishness. But Arya, of course, is very much unsqueamish. I mean, this is Arya Worm Eater, after all. Bran is training, right, in his chapter. Arya's double training. Faceless man by day, skin changer by night. Somewhat timeless for them both. There are a huge number of parallels between this chapter and Bran's final chapter. Timelessness, This chapter itself only takes place over one day, but a lot of time has passed since her last chapter. She's been blind for at least a month. It's not clear. It might be a lot more than that, but it was the end of her last chapter that she became blind. It's the end of this chapter that she becomes unblind. But in between, lots of time passes. So getting to an Arya chapter is such a change of pace. It's so different than elsewhere, even as it's gradually getting more and more connected to other plot lines. It's still probably the farthest off the beaten path, the least connected to the other plot lines. No direct connection to the others yet. No direct connections to dragons or any army or any political cause yet. She's on a different continent as most of the rest of the characters, and not particularly near the other characters who are on Essos. Most of them are over like Slaver's Bay area or Volantis or something. So that's really far from Braavos. She's also just got such a different mind. Her unique combination of upbringing, learned attitude, and natural talents present an outlook that just differs from the rest. Also, just like Bran recently and Jon at the beginning of the book, another chapter that strongly features the moon and skin changing right away.
Her nights were lit by distant stars and the shimmer of moonlight on snow, but every dawn she woke to darkness.
This is also quite a pairing with Theon's most recent chapter, which discussed snow falling as the sun went down. Snow and the fading of the sun is a symbolic meaning for winter, if not the long night itself. Here it's more like snow and night followed by more darkness in the dawn, like no dawn at all. Whoa, that's even, well, it's even darker in both ways that I can mean that. Extremely ominous portent. I mean, when there's no dawn, that means the long night is in full effect. The sun doesn't rise or the sun is completely blocked. Same difference. So it's a very fitting opening for the whole chapter. The waif tells Arya that she has to be blind until, quote, darkness is as sweet to you as light. But to Arya, the darkness already is sweet. It's already when she's the night wolf. She loves to be the night wolf. She feels powerful. She feels strong. She's in charge of a wolf pack. Nothing scares her. She's already quite familiar with and quite comfortable in that darkness. And she's quite comfortable as a blind girl. She seems to adapt to it very well. So the pairing of darkness and skin changing as a way to get around, right? She's adjusting to being blind, but she's also cheating. She's not fully living the life of a blind person. I almost am surprised this chapter wasn't placed closer to Bran's, but hey, Bran's chapter and Arya's chapter, they parallel and tie in thematically to so many of these other chapters. It's like all these chapters have all these tendrils connecting them to so many other places. So no matter where this chapter is placed, there's an argument for it to be somewhere else. Either way, the similarities are beautiful and numerous. Joe calls it some of the best chapter sequencing we ever get, which is a really big compliment because Joe loves to point out the quality of the chapter sequencing. So do I. So to hear Joe say that it's some of the best we've ever got, that's really saying something. That's like an 11, a guy who's a 10 of 10 nailing an 11, you know? It's so good. Not only is she blind, but she's working and walking amidst tunnels that bear many secrets unknown to her. Surely not as dark and endless as the Greenseer Cave, but again, huge, large enough that one night when she was newly blind, she had to sleep on the ground because she got lost. Now she's comfortable with it all. She knows where she's going. But still, it's really cool and really similar. Here's another quote.
Besides her, the House of Black and White was home to 2 serving men, 3 acolytes, Uma the cook, and the 2 priests that she called the Waif and the Kindly Man. Others came and went, sometimes by secret ways, but those were the only ones who lived here.
Yeah. Coming and going by secret ways. This has come up before. You wonder, such a vast underground system that they've got going there. Yeah, there's multiple entrances possibly. So another vibe of Bran's tunnels as well. Bran's cave. I'm calling it Bran's cave. He's taking it over. So what a great thing to have your attention drawn to. It's just so neat. So mysterious. So like her brother, she's not just getting used to being able to see. She's, she's working, practicing, training montage stuff, learning secrets. Also like her brother, she's part of an old and powerful and mysterious group who have very different, maybe problematic views on death. It's not entirely clear to us, though. This gives us a huge landmark in our theme of enhanced sensory descriptions, right? That's something I've been harping on since the beginning of this book. There's nothing like losing a sense to really highlight the others. So it's extending the subject, extending this aspect of the story experience. It's not just about humanity going into survival/animal mode. That's what I originally focused on, meaning less thinking, more sensing. But here it's about being inside the animals via skin changing, showing us what that's like. I mean, if you're inside an animal's perception, it should be highly sense-oriented, right? Being inside a wolf's head, you wouldn't have a lot of deep thoughts. You wouldn't philosophize, I wouldn't think. More about like what your eyes and ears are telling you. So while Bran is learning to slip into the skins of animals, and even Hodor, Arya is a near expert on changing her appearance. And soon she's going to be introduced to the room of faces where slipping into skins becomes literal. But of course, she's also apparently spending most nights as Nymeria. But that's not part of her training. But it kind of is, just not intentionally. This is amazing. In fact, this talent appears to be entirely undetected by the House of Black and White. We've been on the lookout for it. There is counter evidence to the idea that the kindly man or anyone has figured out that she's, while training her other senses. The point of losing your eyesight is to make your other senses strong. Well, her skin changing is another sense in that sense. So it's another thing she has in common with Bran. Powers beyond even what her wise mentors can fathom. She doesn't fully understand what's happening, but she does give it a name, the Night Wolf. So she's got powers that even her ancient mentors don't understand. And like I said, Bran too. And she is very much Arya as ever, though. Bran is still Bran, in a sense, but he's changing more. Arya, I think, is more like Arya from her first chapter than perhaps any character, perhaps any of the Stark. She is the most the same as she was. I don't mean she isn't changing. I mean, she's learned and grown and added skills. But in terms of personality, I think she's changed the least. Stannis is portrayed in this last chapter as someone who would never, ever give up. Arya gives that vibe too, but without the, teeth grinding. Her intensity is a lot more quiet and calm. His intensity is like blatant and out in the front for everyone to see. Like he moves people with his anger. They react to it. But Arya is not a 6'6" Baratheon. She's a short, forgotten Stark and a girl. And that comes with it all sorts of different social values and attitudes and how people will view you. People pay attention when a big, tall Baratheon is talking. Arya, not as much. Not nearly as much. So it's a different attitude, different life. But she is still Arya. And she's still, one of the biggest clues to that is she still has her list. And she bites her lip when thinking in this chapter 2, and no one stops her. And she bites her lip while thinking about how to not reveal her skin-changing ability. She's like, I could tell him that it's snowing in the Riverlands, but no, he's going to want to know how I learned that. And the skin-changing might be one of the most Arya parts of Arya, at least the most Stark parts of Arya. So here's another line that draws attention.
Some of her little gray cousins were afraid of men, even dead men, but not her. Meat was meat, and men were prey. She was the Night Wolf.
Another association of men with meat. Meat was meat. That phrase also appears in Bran's final chapter. How many parallels have we drawn between Bran's last chapter and this one? I've lost track. I wasn't trying to count, but if we did, it would be double digits for sure. So the cannibal vibes are there, even if we don't have a strongly terrible reason to believe Arya is actually eating human flesh as Arya. She's certainly doing it as Nymeria. But this whole not fearing dead men? In this case, she's referring to corpses, actual unmoving corpses. But what will happen when they're moving? Well, Summer wasn't afraid of them. So I'm guessing Nymeria won't be either. And it sounds like Nymeria is larger than Summer and certainly has a larger pack. Summer has a pack of like 3 or 4. Nymeria has a monstrous pack of like 100 or some craziness like that. So, yeah, I wouldn't be afraid of a few walking corpses either if I was a direwolf queen of the Riverlands. Like Nymeria was a queen of the Rhoynish Riverlands. Yeah, that is a parallel. So, and it harkens back to lessons that Bran was taught face to face by his father. You're only brave when you're afraid. Whereas Arya wasn't taught that lesson, but she knows it. She's going to control her fear. She adapts really well. She adapts as well as anyone in this story without, and it's almost it's almost the opposite. When I'm saying that she doesn't change, her personality is rooted and solid. Saying that she adapts really well almost sounds like, well, do those things work together? Well, for her, they do. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes people don't adapt. That stubbornness applies to their whole character, and they have a hard time adjusting to new situations. Arya is amazing in that she has her own personality. Her own sense of self is extremely strong and well-rooted, but she also adapts really well. I mean, she's been like 15 different names. And to her, she thinks like, yeah, well, this is how it goes. How badass is this line? She's walking through the night, blind. Remember, this is a great point. Like, she's walking through the night, and it's all these vivid descriptions of Bravos, and it's easy to forget that she's not seeing them. She's remembering what they look like, and she's hearing them, so she knows what they are. But she's not actually seeing them. At one point, there's that line, she's passing the R'hllor worshippers, and they say, the night is dark and full of terrors, and she's like, not to me. Love that. I love that. It's just like, not me. I'm not afraid of that. There's no terrors. I am the terror in the dark, y'all. Yeah, all right, watch out for her. Yes. So one of the reasons she's not afraid of the dark or of the dead is all the creepy tasks she's asked to do on a regular basis. We brought it up at the beginning. Now let's talk about it more specifically. The dealing with the dead bodies, the blind mortician that she is. 2 bodies in this one. The first is a young man who she can't figure out why he's there. He seems to be maybe Westerosi because he has 6 Westerosi gold coins. But we get the interruption trick. Before she can think about it any farther, the kindly man shows up, or someone shows up to sword fight her while she's blind, and they have that little sword fighting moment there. One long shot theory is this is Edric Storm. A highborn person, young, with, wealth. And so, I mean, it's completely random, but he would fit.
Does she express how young he is? Like, what does she? You obviously don't have the exact terms.
Not the exact quote, but she notices that he's young. His face feels young.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if she was like young, like he's a teenager, or young, like he's a child, Yeah,
it wasn't specific. That's
okay.
A good point. Like, she doesn't think like teenager. She just thinks young. So young could mean...
Because young could mean like in
15,
your 20s.
It could mean
like
25.
Yeah, because like you just wouldn't have wrinkles and stuff, and that's what you can tell, potentially, or just a bunch of other... Anyways.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The second one's an older woman who apparently died while dreaming with a smile on her face. And, well, that is because of... She used one of these candles, one of these... things related to Melisandre's arcana that makes her at peace before she dies. So that's nice. That's some good Dr. Kevorkian stuff there, easing them into death rather than suffering. So that's the good side of all this. That's the true gift of mercy that we like to see. But it's rare, right? This is unusual that people die happy like that. And this is, of course, she collects the coins. Again, we have this notion of they're collecting money from these dead bodies. Where does that all go? We get a little deeper into that mystery next time around when we see the faces. They're going to go down in that. O'Shea grabbed the quote. All right, let's have it. Oh, Nina grabbed it. Cool.
I'll read it if anyone was curious.
Yeah, let's do it.
Before summoning the serving men to carry him away, she knelt and felt his face, tracing the line of his jaw, brushing her fingers across his cheeks and nose, touching his hair. Curly hair and thick. A handsome face, unlined. He was young.
Yeah, I forgot about that detail. Curly, thick hair is part of why it could be Edric. Like, that's still a stretch to assume it's him, but it does fit. Because obviously Edric has thick black hair, curly black hair from being a Baratheon. We don't know that his hair is black, but because she doesn't see it. But hey, anyway, keep that one and file that one back in the maybe column.
I just never thought of him as having curly hair, I guess.
Yeah. I think his hair is curly. Am I wrong? Maybe he doesn't have curly hair.
I don't know that it's ever said.
Okay. Well, that would kill the theory pretty quick if he doesn't have curly hair.
Yeah, I just never pictured him as it. When I looked him up, and Amok's art just has him with straight hair, but I don't know.
Okay. Maybe that. Yeah, I could be wrong about that. Anyway, another character pairing that I would like to see. We talked about Sansa Val and some of these Sansa Stannis. What about Arya and Sam talking about secrets and interesting conversations? And because Arya's become really good at understanding how little tiny details can tell big stories. And Sam is of that same mind of like reading what the Night's Watch ate 200 years ago. Like, you can tell a lot from that. Jon's like, that's boring. But I don't think Arya would find that so boring. So her strength of self, we keep coming back to that, but it serves her extremely well because they keep trying to steer her off her course. It's part of her training to toughen her up, to deceive her. And that's highlighted here because of her blindness, but it goes beyond that. The cornerstone of the teachings of the House of Black and White is to pierce illusions, to see without seeing. False sights, smells, and sounds and other sensations must be reckoned with, but so must false information. The gullible wouldn't make good faceless men. You get kicked out on day one. Nor do gullible wolves survive in the wild, if such a thing could actually be said to exist. We get a repeat of what we heard in Feast, meaning some talk about how the order was founded. It's not a repeat in that it's the same information. Rather, it's an expansion on some of that philosophy. But some of it is repeated in that it's their basic philosophy that they are not they're instruments of death. They are not the judge, the jury, the executioner, any of that. Well, they are the executioner. They're not the judge or the jury. It has some of the same hypocrisy that we were reminded of then. They're happy not to judge, but they're happy to get paid for it. That is kind of being the executioner. We kill men, but we do not presume to judge them. Do you understand? No, she thought. Yes, she said. Yeah, and we don't necessarily understand it either, because it does seem a little bit hypocritical, a little bit of a conundrum. And Arya being so unmovable in terms of her attitude and her conception of what's right and wrong, it's not easier to change her mind on what's right and wrong. And she very clearly sees this is wrong. So it probably is. I mean, Arya is a North Star in that sense. Very few characters have her moral strength. Moral certainty is perhaps a better term for it. And Arya, like Joe writes, what's the point of having that power if you're only going to use it to get rich? That seems very, not necessarily evil, but she can't put it into words necessarily. But to her, there's got to be a better use for it. There's got to be a higher calling for this. There's got to be use it for justice. Killing Darian, she thought that was a good thing. She still disagrees with them on that. They did not convince her that it was wrong for her to do that. She's like, no, like you punish me for it, and I'll act like I get it, but I don't. Like, I think I'm right here. Darian deserved to die. And there's this something also immoral about the second lesson she gets about their founding. We jumped ahead to this well before this chapter, but since it came up again in Jon's chapter, we got to talk about it again. The concept of debt or death. The concept of taking someone in desperation, giving them just enough to survive, and then expecting things from them. It's not quite slavery, but it's close, right? It's a step up from that. It's I don't know what the right word for it is, but it's very similar. And so here we go. We got to take a look from another angle. The first ever faceless man recruiting the second ever faceless man by answering his prayer and killing the second ever faceless man's master. Quote,
"Then he went to the slave and said, 'You offered all you had for this man's death, but slaves have nothing but their lives. That is what the god desires of you. For the rest of your days on earth, you will serve him.' And from that moment, we were two."
In other words, I killed your master, so now my god is your new master, and I invented this god. So I'm your new master, basically. Not quite, but pretty close to that. More like I've invented a new order, a new conception outside myself that we should all follow these rules. But still, this guy made these rules. A person made these rules. They are not divine rules. They are made by a dude who went through some awful things in the mines of Valyria. There may be magic involved. There's probably magic involved. But it's still ultimately a human conception backed by magic, not the other way around. This is the conflict we strongly suspect Arya will see through. Recall how we discussed that the slaves are becoming the slave masters, meaning, well, the faceless men originated as slaves in the mines of Valyria, but now they have their own power, their own mines. They have their own tunnels with which they stash enormous wealth, especially if they're connected to the Iron Bank, possibly the richest organization on the entire damn planet. So it's more elegant than Valyria, but it's similar in its conception in that it's still death, debt, servitude, and massive wealth. At least, so goes the suspicions. And a lot of this is far from proven or certain. We could turn out to be wrong on a lot of these things. Let's turn to some other things here. Dany thinks how Daria wakes up like a cat all at once, but Arya, aka Cat of the Canals, we get this quote: the blind girl rolled onto her side, sat up, sprang to her feet, stretched. Who does that? She literally jumped out of bed. Like, whoa. When she's first being beaten by the kindly man, she hisses in fury after he knocks her stick from her hand, which is kind of a cat. Like, who actually hisses in fury? Like a person? When do you do, like, can you actually think of a person doing that? Like what? She thinks too how she killed Cat herself. Meaning when she killed Darien, she killed Cat of the Canals because Cat of the Canals couldn't exist in the world anymore given the connection to that murder.
By the way, you said hisses?
Yeah.
The Expanse, the last episode, the captions has one of the characters, Naomi, hisses. Like she would, like she actually hissed at someone else.
That's funny.
So,
I guess people just use that phrase somehow. Yeah.
I guess they have like hissed in pain. That's the kind of hiss that humans do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
one makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't do that. So the kindly man, if we're clear on this, they made her blind early to punish her, but she was going to be blinded anyway. But then they made her unblind early also because she cheated. They didn't know it, right? So we're just showing how she's above a lot of this. She's getting around so much of how it's been done. She is the change in the system. But she also thinks, even though she's kind of hardcore, disciplined about her emotions, she does think a little wistfully of being Cat, being with Briscoe and his daughters, and having that freedom and sense of family. And she was happy with that. So it's nice that she still has the ability to be happy in that. You don't want her to go so far that she can't ever be happy again. But also, it's sad because she thinks about her family, her real family, and she has, again, just these misconceptions that hurts us to see. She thinks about her mother not accepting her because of what she looks like and how Jon might not recognize her. She thinks about Arya Horseface, which is a interesting thing to bring up with Jane Poole coming up so much lately because, of course, Jane Poole is the one who coined that phrase. It's also another connection to Lyanna, by the way. But these memories are so far away from her. She sort of associates them with sort of half as her and half as somebody else. The Waif comes back. She's, of course, as it's pointed out in this chapter, she lives there. She's one of the two priests along with the kindly man. She's kind of the poison teacher, which is, wow, like, working with poisons when you're blind? Whew, man, another brave thing to do. And we hear a few stories about how that has backfired a couple times when Arya got, like, hurt herself a couple times, making a few accidents. But we learn a little about the mechanism here. She has to keep drinking this every day to stay blind. It's not some magical thing that turns off when they decide because of one particular anecdote. So it's a short-term effect. When she's giving the questions of the three, like, what three things did you learn today? We get the anecdote about the good heart and the elephant, which we brought up last week, I believe, in reference to Hardhome. On this side, we don't need to repeat the anecdote, but we do know that one of the two ships made it to Braavos. Because it was having trouble with storms, it got damaged. So it's a slave ship showing up at Braavos, a place that does not allow slaves. So it's possible we'll learn about the fate of these people. Because what are they doing? Just chilling at Braavos? All these women and children? Like, what are they doing? Are they put to work? Are they given jobs? I mean, I'd like to know. I suppose some of you all would as well. Maybe that'll come up later. So all her stubbornness, braveness, her hidden skills, her lockdown personality really culminate in the chapter's final moment. She gives such good info on her first two things that you learned of the day that the third one is delivered with a lightning strike of her stick onto his hand, attacking her mentor and justifying it. Like, he can't argue with her. It's like, yeah, he can't say, no, that wasn't me hitting you all those times. He basically is like, how did you know? He admits to it. But she's so on top of things, such a boss. She's like, I'm not going to tell you. I already gave you 3 things. That's the rule. So that's pretty sweet. And she's looking down through that cat. You got to love it. True cat of the canals, actual cat. And this is the fundamental basis for one of my theories about Arya going back to the tunnels of the Red Keep. Because there's all those cats there. She's already been there before. She's a little familiar with it. The darkness won't scare her. The dragon skulls won't scare her this time. They did last time, but not this time. And she can use those cats to find her way through the darkness. They have better night vision than a person. So it's so cool just to repeat this point in a different way. By getting her to train in blindness, they actually accidentally forced her to train her skin changer skills. So she's actually advancing along a path she has no mentor for, because of these circumstances. It's great. Like, George found a way to give her a way to progress in skin changing without giving her a mentor. But he did give her a mentor. It's just kind of an accident that by forcing her to train blind, she's becoming a better skin changer. It's so cool. It's also similar to like what we talk about with John. John didn't conceive of the possibility of glamours for why Arya isn't Alys or is Alys. And he didn't conceive of the possibility that there's 2 fake Aryas, which would explain why there's one here and one there. Similarly, the House of Black and White most likely hasn't even considered the possibility that Arya might be a skin changer. If they knew that possibility, I bet they would do some things different. They'd probably test her. They'd probably they could come up with some way to guess or to get her to reveal that. And I wonder if this shortcutting her blindness training will cost her later or not, because she has ways to make up for it. I also wonder if this accelerating of the process is part of the 5-year gap being scrapped. I wonder if George made her a stronger skin changer in part because of having to shorten the training period, the training phase, which could have been as long as 5 years, and now it appears like it's going to be a lot shorter. Another hidden under the radar connection piece of evidence that Arya still thinks of her old life, that she's still Arya, that she's still Stark, is her continuous trend of naming herself, her aliases being connections to her old life. Started off when she was Nan, like old Nan. Then she's Cat, like Catelyn. And now she's Beth, like Beth Cassel, the daughter of Sir Roderick, who was the same age as Arya when she was growing up. Now, Beth was more like Sansa as a personality-wise, but still, same age, growing up in the same place, had to be aware of her. So, very strong hints that Arya is still thinking of home, even in ways when it's not explicitly mentioned. And she's trying to maybe forget about some of that, trying to discipline herself to not think about it. But she's thinking about things like names don't matter. Yet she's choosing very specific names, so I think she's lying to herself a little bit there. An important mention, very important under the radar mention here as well, is that a new Sea Lord will be chosen soon because the current one is sick. When that one dies, everyone expects the quote-unquote knives to come out. That could have a big impact across Braavos. It might create new contracts for the Faceless Men, like this guy wants this guy killed because he's a new rival for the Sea Lord's position. This could be the type of chaos that Arya takes advantage of to escape. This could be the type of chaos that spills out into other arcs. It could affect Dany or Jon or something like that. Could affect food supplies. I don't know. There's a lot of... It's a big wave of change coming to Braavos. Arya's had this kind of peaceful existence, learning, growing, a lot of time passing without needing to check in on her. I think that's about to end when the Sea Lord dies and this chaos comes out of that, this infighting. Yeah, that could be a pretty big deal. Because the way the Sea Lord is chosen is, quote, chosen by the city's magisters and keyholders from amongst the citizenry by a process as convoluted as it is arcane. So, Nina suggests that vagueness of it might be intentional so that George didn't have to box himself into a corner with the actual way it's going to work. He can kind of decide as he goes. Probably a good call by George there. Let's get to some of y'all's comments. Aegon the Sixth says, happy holidays, you two. Appreciate that, Aegon the Sixth. Happy holidays to everyone as well. Once again, we are so happy and lucky to be able to spend this time with you all, to be able to speak to you all about our favorite series and just hang out and have a good time. Hopefully next year is even better.
So I wanted to talk about what we were talking about in the chat, which is more on the Baratheon hair regarding Edric Storm. Gendry notably has a thick mop of hair. Bella has curls, but we don't know her mother. I want to point out that the Tyrells and the Lannisters have curls that are outright pointed out. So I feel like the Baratheons wouldn't have curls just because of that. But I think this is the best point of all, which is that Oliver Moore said that Edric had Florent ears. If you were blind and feeling the body, that would be very notable.
That's true.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
That's a good point. Okay, so we got a good chance that's not Edric then. It's still possible, but I guess we should say probably not. Probably not. Julie A says, awesome if those free folks share information about the walkers, and that spurs Arya to go home. Oh, yeah. They could also say some things about Jon, like give some updates on Jon, who comes up this chapter. He's got a nickname, the Black Bastard of the Wall. I love that. I love the way George shows us how these characters are viewed from a distance, like the way he plays with rumor and all those things. This is a little milder in that sense because Jon doesn't have this like reputation as some murderous dude or whatever, like Dany does. But still, he has a nickname. And yeah, that's a great call by Julie A. Yeah, the wildlings could tell Arya some things.
Excuse me, Aziz.
The free folk. Dornish Dame says, lamb and dog and mutton and the flesh of man. She's feasting on human flesh as Nymeria, and we're back to the rules Hagon gives Varamir. That's true. We did mention that she was eating human flesh as Nymeria, but we didn't mention that is specifically an abomination according to Hagon. But that's what happens when you don't have a mentor to tell you these things. Arya's just behaving naturally. She's like, I'm a wolf. I do wolf things. That includes eating meat. Meat is meat. Gotta eat. So that's kind of dark, actually, because you figure Hagon, as we said at the time, Hagon's not a good guy, but there's probably a good reason for that prohibition against eating flesh in animal form, and just as there is an even stronger prohibition against eating it in human form. And that's it for today, my friends and fellow historians. Last week we covered 150-19. This week it was 172 and 52. A bigger chunk of time. So far we've covered 1,837 minutes of 2,922. So we have just over 1,000 minutes left. We have covered 62.8%. Not quite 2/3. Pretty close. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to leave a review if you're listening to the podcast version, as I am wont to express from time to time. It makes a really big difference. Word of mouth is the best, though. If you tell a friend about History of Westeros podcast, We appreciate that even more than leaving a review. Hey, if you can do both, then we're in your debt. Couple of episodes that we mentioned today that are relevant to further discussions if you want to go deeper into the rabbit holes, per se. We talked about the Battle of Ice. It's our series of 3 episodes with Brendan Beefish. The first episodes on YouTube he ever appeared on. That's pretty cool. Our Fire and Blood Iron Bank Faceless Man episode was pretty relevant. Same goes for our Fire and Blood The Shivers episode featuring Joe Magician. Our Summer Hall episodes were mentioned again. The Wit and Wisdom of Stannis at the end is a good time to bring that one up with some of Stannis' good quotes. And I want to shout out my second podcast, The Witcher's Podcast of Surprise, that I do with McCall Schick and Kyle Foster. The reason I bring it up is because of Alys in Wun-Wunderland, all the fairy tale themed stuff. Early on in the Witcher novels, almost every short story is heavily influenced by a famous fairy tale or popular legend. In some cases, it's not a fairy tale. For example, the first story is a strong homage to Dracula. It doesn't stay that way. The Witcher series eventually runs out of fairy tales to pay homage to. But early on, it's just packed full of fairy tale references, and it's really fun to realize, like, wait, this is Beauty and the Beast. This is inverted Beauty and the Beast with humor, and it's great. So I love that aspect to it. If that's the kind of thing you like, then there's another reason for you to check out the Podcast of Surprise. We are just getting started with the second book. We're doing chapter by chapter, basically. So check it out if you are so inclined. Next week, we have another set of 4. A Ghost in Winterfell, a.k.a. Winter Falls on Winterfell, a.k.a. A Song of Snow and Murder.
Hold on. You're going to want to repeat that because apparently there was some cat interference, some sound.
Repeat from where?
I think just from next time A Ghost in Winterfell. But let's wait 1 second to see if people still hear that going on. I don't know. Okay, let's go.
Next time up, another set of 4 chapters. We have A Ghost in Winterfell, Winter Falls on Winterfell, a.k.a. A Song of Snow and Murder.
Tyrion 10. The gang gets sold into slavery, a.k.a. in the belly of the yellow whale.
Jaime 1. The North of the South, a.k.a. A Tree of 1,000 Ravens and One.
Jon 10. A Red Wedding with No Deaths, a.k.a. How I Married Your Magnar.
Thanks to everyone for coming. Thanks to Joe and Nina for their invaluable assistance. Thanks to our History of Westeros mods for running the ship over there. Same goes for our mods on Discord. That would be Sir Slorp. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld from clairdocs.de for the intro and our awesome maps. Thank you to Kevin MacLeod for the Valar Rereadis music intro. Thank you to Joey Townsend. What's going on?
It just keeps being bad. Anyways, I guess this doesn't matter. Just start from your credits again.
Thanks to Joe and Nina for their invaluable assistance with the conception of each episode. And again, check out their work outside of History of Westeros. That's the Isle of Faces podcast and goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. Thanks to the History of Westeros mods for their invaluable assistance with each chapter posting, leading the discussions, and making this all more thorough. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld for our maps and video intro. Kevin MacLeod for the Valar Rereadis music intro. Thanks to everyone who participates on Flick, Facebook, Slack, and Discord. Thanks to Sir Slorp for being our Discord mod. Thanks to Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval for our regular History of Westeros music. Thanks to our Bengineer for the sound engineering. Thank you very much to our patrons for the financial support. Without you all, we would not be here. If you wish to join that group, go to patreon.com/History of Westeros. Here Be Dragons is starting up at their usual time of 6. They're covering the Mandalorian chapters 14 through 16, which are the final 3 episodes of Season 2. And once again, a reminder to check out Ashea, Fandomedia, Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, right after the Crusader Kings 2 game streams that I run on our channel every Friday, just before that, starting at 6. Okay, everybody, have a great week. Have a great rest of your holiday season. If you're listening to this later, past the holiday season, well, we hope your holidays were great, and we hope your future holidays are too. We'll see you next time for more Valar Rereadis.